Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we wander into the deep, icy heart of medieval Europe, where winters had a way of stretching time, testing stamina, and making you reconsider the concept of comfort. Imagine standing at the edge of a snow-dusted field, your breath rising in faint clouds, the crunch of frozen earth underfoot punctuating the silence. You probably won't survive this without the knowledge of the generations that came before, yet here you are, ready to step into their world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And why not tell me where you are and what time it is while you settle in? It adds a quiet, comforting sense of connection. Knowing we share these moments across the centuries and continents, now, dim the lights, flow straight into the story. You trudge along a path that has been swept by both wind and frost, your boots crunching against a frozen mixture of snow and mud. The chill bites at your fingers and cheeks, nudging your awareness of just how raw the season can be. For peasants. Winter was not an interruption of life, but a defining feature of it. From early November to late March, the rhythms of daily living were dictated by the cold. Fields that were lush and fertile during summer now lie dormant, their soil hard as stone, rendering most outdoor work impossible. Food becomes scarce, and the hours of daylight shrink so dramatically that tasks must be timed with precision. Historians still argue whether villagers relied more on stored provisions or opportunistic hunting. But what is clear is that preparation was everything. As you approach your own hut humble, thatched, and modest, you notice the faint curl of smoke from the chimney. That small wisp carries the promise of warmth inside. The hearth is the centre of life in a medieval peasant home, not just for cooking, but for light, heat, and gathering. Its placement in the middle of the house ensures that its warmth radiates evenly, offering a small sanctuary against the bitter wind outside. Families would begin adding thick layers of straw and rushes to their floors to insulate against the cold seeping from the ground. And some of the wealthier villagers even had rudimentary partitions that could help trap heat in sleeping areas. A mainstream historical fact is that the hearth was multifunctional. It allowed for cooking, heating, and even early attempts at social organisation within the home. The smells are distinct and grounding. Smoke tinged with pine and the faint aroma of burning dung fill the air, mingling with the earthy scent of straw and animal hides. You can almost hear the quiet rustle of a cat weaving through the legs of villagers, seeking warmth, while dogs lie sprawled near the hearth, their presence both comforting and protective. Curiously, in some regions, peasants were known to burn herbs alongside wood to mask odours or even repel pests. It sounds eccentric, yet it was practical, adding a faint herbal note to an otherwise smoky environment. Outside, the landscape is both beautiful and threatening. Trees are skeletal, their bare branches etched against a grey sky. Snow blankets the ground, hiding uneven terrain, water sources, and hazards alike. You trudge through what might be several inches of frost, crunching underfoot, and realise just how much energy every movement requires in this environment. Labour is harder, and every task consumes more calories, which are already limited. Historians still argue whether peasants consumed more bread or dairy during the winter months, but it is widely accepted that their diet became denser in both energy and substance as a direct response to the cold. You pause to take in the frozen river, its surface opaque and glimmering under a pale winter sun. Some villagers will later harvest blocks of ice for storage, packing them with straw to preserve food supplies and keep perishables from spoiling. It is a curious survival tactic, one that feels counterintuitive at first. How can ice, already cold, help sustain life? Yet it does. A testament to human ingenuity in the face of relentless conditions. You watch, imagining the careful hands of labourers chiselling through thick ice, stacking blocks to last for weeks or even months, your gaze drifts back to the homes dotting the hillside. Smoke plumes rise in scattered columns, creating a rhythm across the landscape. The distance between huts is measured by both necessity and social interaction. Too close, and disease spreads quickly. Too far, and neighbours cannot share crucial resources. Shared knowledge of weather patterns, ice thickness, and snow depth could mean life or death. You notice children weaving between structures, laughter muffled by layers of wool and fur, their play tempered by practical routines, even in play. Survival skills are being passed down quietly, almost unconsciously. The first real snow begins to fall. Light at first, drifting down in slow, lazy flakes that land on your shoulders, hat and cloak. It is mesmerizing and soft, yet the growing accumulation reminds you that the simple act of moving from one place to another will soon demand more care, energy and caution in these moments. Survival is as much about observation as it is about preparation. You feel the cold creeping under your layers, reminding you of the advantage of knowledge passed through generations, which paths remain navigable, which streams are safe to cross, which tools will endure the chill. Inside, your family moves with quiet efficiency. Pots are arranged on the hearth for cooking. Water is drawn from a nearby well or melted from snow, and vegetables stored in earthenware jars are readied for consumption. Food scarcity ensures that nothing is wasted. Even peels and husks can be repurposed for broths or fodder. You notice an elder, perhaps your grandmother, carefully inspecting grains for mould, recounting methods learned from parents, who learned them from their own parents. It is a continuum of knowledge, subtle but vital. A quirky tidbit, some households even preserved small amounts of salted fish tucked away in hidden corners. Often considered a delicacy or emergency rations, the salt not only preserved the fish but added a touch of flavour to the otherwise monotonous winter fare. While it sounds indulgent, in reality, it was practical, a reserve for when times truly became lean. Outside, the wind begins to whisper through the trees, carrying faint echoes of the village's activity, mingling with the soft crunch of snow and distant calls of livestock. You notice the rhythmic huffing of animals in their stalls, the occasional squeal of pigs, and the low murmur of cows, all of them sharing warmth and shelter. The barns are as much a part of the survival strategy as the hearth. Their presence a constant reassurance that food and labour are intertwined. Even as evening falls, the glow of the hearth stretches through the windows of neighbouring huts. Smoke trails curl upward and disperse into the night sky, and you realise that the village itself is alive, a network of warmth, knowledge, and shared endurance. You think about how many people have experienced this, generations upon generations, each learning to navigate the harshness of winter with minimal resources but maximum ingenuity. Historians still debate whether communal survival methods were more effective than individualized strategies. Yet what you see is the undeniable rhythm of life continuing, quietly, insistently. You settle near the fire, letting the heat seep through your layers of wool and fur. Outside, the first hints of darkness gather, painting the snow in deepening shades of grey and blue. You feel the season pressing in, the necessity of preparation and cooperation sinking into your awareness. This is winter as it was lived, not as it is imagined, a continuous dance of endurance, observation, and adaptation. And in this first chapter of your journey through the medieval winter, you already glimpse the resilience that will carry villagers through months of cold, quiet, and survival. The smoke from your hearth swirls upward, carrying the faint scent of pine and charred wood, filling the space with warmth and familiarity. You trudge through the morning chill to tend the fire, poking at the embers with a well-worn stick and listening to the soft hiss of wood releasing its heat. Inside your humble home, every movement is purposeful, deliberate, and measured, because wasting energy in winter is not just inefficient, it can be dangerous. You adjust a small clay pot over the embers, knowing that the slow simmer will sustain your family through the morning, while outside the frozen world waits with patience, indifferent to human needs. Preparing the hearth is more than a simple chore, it is an act of life preservation. Layers of dry reeds and straw are arranged carefully, acting as insulation on the floors, while the walls constructed from wattle, mud, and occasionally stone try their best to keep the bitter winds at bay. You notice how even the smallest gaps are stuffed with scraps of cloth or moss, a clever improvisation passed down through generations. A mainstream historical fact is that the hearth was the central hub of domestic life. All daily activity revolved around it, from cooking to mending clothes, to sharing stories that warmed both mind and spirit. Outside, frost glitters in the early sun, each blade of grass etched with ice, each branch outlined in crystalline detail. You feel the contrast as you step back inside, where the heat wraps around you in waves. You probably won't survive this without this small sanctuary. Yet centuries of trial and error have refined these domestic techniques into a rhythm that feels natural, almost effortless. Historians still argue whether multi-room huts were common, or if most families lived in a single large space. But you can see the practicality of shared warmth. Food preparation is intertwined with warmth. You move root vegetables from storage and inspect them carefully, discarding any signs of rot. Large cauldrons bubble with porridge or stew, sometimes enriched with small amounts of salted fish or preserved meat. The smell is savoury and comforting, filling the air with promise. Oddly, in some villages, families would hang a piece of leather or dried herbs near the fire to mask strong odours or keep pests away. It seems strange to us now, but it was a pragmatic layer of protection, blending domestic care with ingenuity. You pause to watch the flames dancing, their movement hypnotic. It is easy to let your attention drift, imagining the smoke curling lazily through the rafters, the sound of your own breathing mixing with the faint crackle of burning wood. You can almost hear the whispered echoes of generations who did the same thing, in huts that may have been slightly smaller, slightly colder, but no less alive with purpose and life. Small children scurry past, fetching water from a bucket thawed from overnight ice, their cheeks pink and hands numb. Learning early the tactile knowledge of survival. Livestock care is part of the hearth routine. Even though the animals are outside in barns or pens, you can hear the muffled lowing of cows, the soft snuffles of pigs, the occasional clatter of a goat shifting straw beneath its hooves. You step outside briefly, feeling the crunch of frozen earth underfoot, noting how the animals huddle together for warmth. Their survival is as critical as yours because they provide milk, meat, and labour in a world where substitutes are rare. A quirky tidbit, some villagers even stoked small fires in barns, a risky but effective method to prevent frostbite in weaker animals, balancing danger with necessity. Inside, you wrap your fingers around a cup of warmed ale, the steam rising gently into your face. Drinking small amounts provides both nutrition and a sense of warmth, though historians still debate whether medieval ale had enough alcohol to truly impact body heat, or if it was mostly about hydration and calorie content. You take a slow sip and let your muscles relax, noticing how the simple heat of the liquid complements the fire's warmth. The tasks of the day are structured around the fire: repairs to clothing, cleaning of tools, and preparation of preserved foods happens simultaneously, almost ritualistically. Straw mats are replaced, clay pots are wiped, and small bundles of firewood are arranged close enough to be reached without stepping back into the cold for too long. You realize that efficiency here is not just about saving time, it is about survival, an economy of movement, and an understanding of energy expenditure that modern life rarely requires. Outside. The wind picks up again, rattling against the hut and stirring snow from higher branches. The frozen landscape seems almost alive, whispering warnings, guiding choices. Peasants have learned to read these subtle cues: the direction of wind, the weight of snow on branches, the colour of clouds signalling storm or calm. Scholars still debate whether villagers relied on formal knowledge or instinct developed over years. But what is certain is that experience guided every step. You move to tend a small cauldron of stew, stirring it slowly to prevent scorching. Aromas mingle roasted root vegetables, salted meat, and hints of herbs. The food is simple, yet each bite carries months of preparation, from planting in spring to preservation in fall. Even a small household can see this as a triumph, a testament to endurance and careful planning. You glance outside and notice your neighbours performing similar routines, a quiet network of preparation and maintenance threading through the village. Children practice small tasks, learning to feed animals, fetch water, and even manage tiny fires under watchful eyes. Their lessons are practical, embedded in daily survival. Even play becomes a subtle form of training, reinforcing the skills that will serve them when they're older. Oddly enough, some families encourage games near the fire where children toss small clay or straw balls, strengthening coordination and teaching awareness of space, a subtle preparation for winter chores that involve balance on slippery surfaces. You watch the light change, the sun dipping lower in a sky that feels perpetually short on hours. Shadows stretch across the snow outside, while inside the fire's glow grows more comforting, more central. Every task, every movement, every observation is threaded together in a continuous rhythm designed to preserve warmth, sustain energy, and maintain life. Historians still argue whether communal kitchens or individual hearths were more effective, but you sense that cooperation and observation of others' routines created a tapestry of shared survival strategies. As the day fades, the hearth becomes a focus of reflection. You notice the subtle layers of smoke curling around beams and rafters, the scent of food mingling with straw and animal hide, and the quiet hum of life persisting despite the relentless winter. Outside, the frozen world continues, indifferent and vast, yet you feel the invisible threads of skill, adaptation, and persistence holding everything together. This is what preparing the hearth truly meant more than fire and warmth. It was planning, ritual, observation, and a quiet, constant conversation with the season itself. You sit back, letting your muscles loosen and your senses absorb the patterns of light, heat, smell, and sound. Each ember is a reminder that survival is both simple and complex, practical yet profoundly human. In tending the hearth, you tend life itself, the first real mastery over a world otherwise dominated by frost, darkness, and uncertainty. You step away from the hearth briefly, stretching your stiff limbs, and glance at the stores of food arranged neatly against the walls. Root vegetables sit in baskets lined with straw, jars of pickled cabbage and turnips rest on shelves, and small sacks of grain are tucked safely in corners. Every item tells a story of careful planning, of harvests gathered and preserved with precision, and of the intimate knowledge peasants held of their environment. You trudge across the floor, feeling the straw beneath your feet, imagining how these provisions will carry your household through the months when the earth is frozen and fields lie fallow. Food was the anchor of survival. You notice how each item serves multiple purposes. Grains can be ground into flour, fed to animals, or even used to make a simple porridge. Root vegetables provide sustenance and a degree of vitamins. Salted and smoked meats offer concentrated protein and calories. A mainstream historical fact is that winter diets for peasants were monotonous yet calorically sufficient if managed correctly. It's remarkable how ingenuity, patience, and observation turned scarcity into a manageable, predictable system. You carry a small basket outside to check on stored cabbages, brushing snow from the leaves. The cold bites at your fingers, reminding you how much effort is needed to protect even these humble vegetables. In some regions, peasants would bury cabbages and turnips in pits lined with straw, insulating them against frost. It seems almost theatrical, but this method could extend the life of a vegetable for months. Historians still argue whether this technique was universally applied or reserved for wealthier households, but the creativity involved is undeniable. Your gaze shifts toward the frozen landscape beyond the village. Fields are barren, a mosaic of white and grey, dotted with skeletal fences and frost-laden trees. Despite the cold, survival often required venturing outside to forage or hunt. Small game, such as rabbits or birds, offered protein, while wild herbs added flavour or medicinal qualities to meals. Quirky tidbit: some peasants kept cats not just for pest control but to encourage rodents to reveal themselves, indirectly aiding in hunting strategies. Observing these small interactions makes you appreciate the subtlety of medieval life, where every action had layered purposes. Back inside, you inspect grains for any signs of spoilage. Rodents were a constant threat, and the smell of mildew could mean disaster for stored provisions. You breathe in the mixed aromas of flour, straw, and faint smoke, realizing that food management was both practical and sensory. You touch each sack carefully, tapping and listening for hollow sounds that indicate empty or infested areas. Historians still debate whether medieval households stored more than a season's worth of grain, but you can see why careful rotation and monitoring would be essential. Cooking routines adapt to the cold as well. Large cauldrons simmer over open flames, producing porridges and stews that nourish while conserving heat. Water from wells or melted snow must be managed efficiently, since repeated trips outside are exhausting and dangerous in harsh weather. You notice how multitasking becomes second nature, stirring the pot while tending firewood, while also checking on sleeping children or animals. The rhythm is continuous, a dance of efficiency shaped by necessity and experience. You hear the faint crunch of snow outside as neighbours tend their own provisions. Shared knowledge often spread this way. One family's solution could inspire another, whether it was a technique for storing potatoes or a clever method to keep stored water from freezing. Historians still argue whether formal communal instruction or informal observation was more influential in shaping winter survival strategies, but the results were practical and immediate. The smell of preserved foods mingles with the faint sweetness of dried fruits, stored in small clay jars. These treats are rare, save for special occasions or as supplements to the everyday diet. You take a moment to appreciate the subtle layering of flavours and nutrients, understanding how scarcity encouraged not just frugality but creativity. Fringe practices also emerge. Some households kept small caches of honey or vinegar, believing these could stave off illness or enhance food preservation. It seems quaint now, yet it reflects the constant search for reliability amid uncertainty. Children peek at the preserved stores, curious about each jar and sack, learning through observation. You notice that even their playful questions are part of the educational rhythm of survival. Tasks that seem mundane, sorting grains, checking vegetables, filling pots, carry lessons in responsibility, awareness, and the tactile understanding of food management. Their small hands, cold but steady, contribute to the household's collective efforts. Outside, a gentle snowfall begins, dusting the landscape in white and softening the shapes of huts, fences, and livestock pens. You realize that this quiet transformation also affects the practicality of gathering supplies. Trips to foraging sites or outlying barns require planning, attention to detail, and sometimes creativity in navigating drifts or icy patches. Small adjustments, like spreading straw on frequently used paths, make the difference between smooth passage and exhausting effort. Returning inside, you arrange the harvested vegetables near the fire, appreciating how proximity to warmth slightly prolongs their shelf life. Every choice feels deliberate: the placement of grain sacks, the layering of straw, the rotation of food items to ensure freshness. It's a system that blends observation, instinct, and careful record-keeping. You can almost hear the whispered advice of elders from previous generations, guiding these small but critical decisions. Cooking is slow and deliberate. Porridges bubble gently, and stews thicken over time, releasing aromas that wrap around the space like a comforting cloak. You watch the food and feel the patience required to sustain life during winter months. Oddly enough, some peasants added small amounts of ash to baking mixtures to improve texture or flavour. It sounds unusual, yet these subtle adjustments reveal both experimentation and adaptability in culinary practice. As evening approaches, the fire's glow deepens, casting shadows across the walls and straw-lined floors. You pause to consider the continuity of this rhythm. Winter survival is an intricate interplay between preparation, observation, and improvisation. Even in the quiet moments, each movement, each check of stored food, each stir of the pot, is part of a carefully orchestrated strategy that has been honed over generations. The cold outside presses against walls and windows, reminding you of the stakes involved. Food is life, preparation is survival, and the sensory cues, the smell of roasting vegetables, the sight of frost on window panes, the sound of snow crunching beneath boots guide every choice. In this environment, you begin to understand how deeply intertwined human activity and the natural world were. Our attention to detail, creativity, and shared knowledge could mean the difference between hardship and thriving. You step outside, the crisp air immediately pinching your cheeks and nudging you awake. The frozen river ahead glints under a weak winter sun, its surface uneven and treacherous, yet it holds a secret life that villagers have relied on for generations. Ice harvesting is both a necessity and a skill, a way to store coolness for months when temperatures rise indoors from the hearth. Evidence suggests that some communities cut slabs of ice, packing them in straw-lined cellars to preserve dairy, meat, and occasionally delicate fruits. It seems counterintuitive to use ice to keep food from spoiling, yet it works. A subtle testament to medieval ingenuity. You walk closer, feeling the crunch of frost beneath your boots, and notice how the villagers work methodically, each movement precise. Men and women swing long chisels and saws, breaking through the river's frozen crust with practiced effort. Oddly enough, some families even mark their ice caches with small stones or sticks to ensure that each household retrieved only what belonged to them. A simple but effective early method of property management. The rhythm of cutting, stacking, and transporting blocks seems hypnotic, and you sense that there is a quiet pride in maintaining these life-sustaining stores. The cold bites into your fingers as you carry a small piece of ice to a storage pit near the hut. The air is filled with a scent of wet straw and frozen mud, layered with faint smoke from distant chimneys. Scholars continue to debate whether these ice cellars were common throughout Europe or localized to specific river valleys with particular climates. But what you see suggests a combination of necessity and adaptation. Each household's methods vary, yet the goal remains the same: to extend the life of perishable food beyond what simple preservation could achieve. You glance back at the village, noting the quiet efficiency of winter life. Villagers carry logs to the fire, fetch water, and check on animals, all while keeping an eye on the ice pits. The soundscape is muted footsteps crunching, the occasional slap of ice against straw, and the soft murmur of conversation. It is a stark contrast to the chaos of market days or harvest time, yet there is an underlying energy in these carefully choreographed tasks. Some researchers have questioned whether this calm belied the physical exhaustion that winter imposed, and you can feel how every task, no matter how simple it seems, is layered with effort. Nearby, a small child attempts to lift a chunk of ice that is clearly too heavy, and an adult bends to help. You watch the interaction, noticing how skills are passed down subtly, which edges to hold, how to angle the cut, how to balance the block on a sled or cart. It is hands-on education, almost intuitive, yet critical, oddly enough, in some regions. Peasants would insulate the top layer of ice with sawdust, a practice that seems quirky now but effectively slowed melting during warmer spells. You imagine generations observing, refining, and transmitting these little hacks. Back at the hut, the ice is placed carefully in a pit lined with straw, surrounded by clay and occasionally mud to minimize airflow. The subtle, insulating effect, combined with careful layering, prolongs the ice's lifespan, often into the late spring months. Evidence suggests that households with even a modest ice supply could stretch their winter rations more effectively, creating a buffer against lean periods when crops were long gone. You sip water slowly, appreciating the thought and labour embedded in these small but vital stores. The sun dips lower, painting frost-laden branches in soft hues of gold and pink. You notice how shadows stretch across the ice pits and huts, signalling the need to complete outdoor work before dark. Temperature management is subtle yet vital. The ice must remain frozen but accessible, the vegetables must stay dry, and livestock must be accounted for. Scholars continue to explore whether ice harvesting was widespread across Europe or concentrated in regions with specific climate patterns. But it seems that wherever it existed, it was valued highly. Inside the home, the rhythmic crackle of the hearth contrasts with the muted sounds outside. You examine preserved food now cooled against the chill, thinking about how the stored ice complements rather than replaces other methods like salting, smoking, or pickling. Oddly enough, some households even kept small ice caches near sleeping areas for medicinal purposes, believing that cold could alleviate certain ailments, from fevers to swelling. Whether effective or symbolic, it underscores the interplay of observation, superstition, and practicality that define daily life. You glance at the barn, where animals huddle together for warmth. Their presence contributes to household heat, and keeping them healthy ensures milk, eggs, or meat that may later be preserved with ice. Evidence suggests that some villages coordinated animal care across families, sharing tasks and knowledge to maintain livestock during extreme cold. You notice subtle variations: the angle of hay, the thickness of straw bedding, even the orientation of stalls to minimize drafts. These small details reflect a deep understanding of both environmental and biological rhythms. Evening settles in, and you feel the calm that comes after a day of measured labour. The ice is stored, provisions are checked, and the fire burns steadily, casting gentle warmth throughout the home. Oddly enough, the quiet of winter seems amplified by the knowledge that survival hinges on such mundane yet essential tasks. You take a slow breath, feeling the contrast of chill outside and warmth within, appreciating the layers of care, observation, and experience that make this life possible. The village is quiet now, except for occasional footsteps and distant animal noises. You reflect on the ingenuity woven into these routines, the strange elegance of harvesting ice to preserve life, and the intimate dance between people and environment. Scholars continue to explore whether such practices were inspired by necessity alone, or if cultural tradition played an equal role. Whatever the case, you feel a deep respect for the subtle complexity of winter survival, for the skill and foresight required, and for the generations who perfected these rhythms long before modern conveniences existed. You step back inside, brushing snow from your cloak, and let your eyes adjust to the dim, flickering light of the hearth. The warmth feels like a small, tangible shield against the relentless cold pressing on the village from every side. You notice the walls of your hut, built from wattle and mud, and feel the subtle insulation they provide. Straw mats cover the floors, adding both warmth and cushioning. Evidence suggests that layering materials like this was common among peasant households, a simple yet effective method of retaining heat in an otherwise unyielding environment. Even small gaps around doors and windows were carefully stuffed with cloth or moss, an improvised but practical barrier to the chill. You run your fingers along the wooden beams, feeling the faint roughness and imperfections left by generations of builders. The structure is humble, but remarkably resilient, oddly enough. Some households reinforced walls with animal hides, tacking them in strategic locations to block drafts and even muffle sound. It seems peculiar now, but in the cold and quiet of winter, these measures could make the difference between discomfort and genuine danger. Scholars continue to debate how widespread these techniques were, but the combination of observation and adaptation is clear. The hut itself is a delicate balance of warmth, light, and living space. Smoke curls upward from the hearth, creating a thin haze that clings to rafters before finding its way through the chimney. The aroma of simmering vegetables, salted meats, and burning wood melds into something deeply grounding. You notice how even the simplest materials, clay, straw, wood, animal hides, serve multiple purposes, illustrating the ingenuity of those who relied on what the land and animals provided. Historians still argue whether wealthier peasants were significantly better insulated than poorer households, but small, clever adjustments often bridged the gap. You move to check on your sleeping area. Layers of straw and rushes heaped high to trap warmth. Blankets and cloaks add extra insulation, and the entire setup feels surprisingly cozy. Children lie bundled close, their faces glowing pink from residual warmth. A curious practice recorded in some villages involved placing small pots of hot embers beneath straw bedding to heat the floor before sleep. It sounds uncomfortable by modern standards. Yet the method reflects an intuitive understanding of heat transfer and human comfort in frigid conditions. Outside, the wind hammers against the hut, shaking loose snow from thatched roofs and bare branches. You notice how the structures are angled, windows small, and doors reinforced to minimize exposure. Even small villages demonstrate remarkable ingenuity in adapting their homes to seasonal extremes, oddly enough. Some families built temporary outer walls of snow or packed earth to shield entrances, a practice that seems eccentric now, but was surprisingly effective. Scholars continue to explore regional variations of these winterized homes, revealing a patchwork of solutions tailored to local climate and available materials. The livestock barn is another critical element of warmth and survival. You listen to the muffled lowing of cows and the shuffling of pigs in straw bedding. Their bodies radiate heat that seeps into nearby structures, and caring for them is as much a matter of preserving your household's resources as it is about animal welfare. Evidence suggests that communal arrangements, where multiple families tended animals and shared spaces, were common in harsher regions. This collaboration not only conserved labour, but increased the chances of survival during extreme weather. You glance at the cooking area near the hearth, where a stew simmers slowly. Root vegetables, salted meat, and grains fill the pot, releasing aromas that envelop the hut. Preparation is deliberate and time-consuming, as every movement outside costs precious energy in freezing temperatures. Oddly enough, some peasants sprinkled a bit of ash into their porridge or bread, believing it improved flavour and texture. It seems strange today, but such small experiments demonstrate a practical curiosity, blending intuition with necessity. Water management in winter is an ongoing challenge. Wells can freeze, snow must be melted carefully over fire, and supply is limited by both labour and fuel. You watch as a family member fetches snow and sets it over the simmering pot, transforming the frozen flakes into usable water for cooking and cleaning. Scholars continue to debate whether certain households relied more heavily on collected snow or thawed ice from river storage. But the combination of methods shows adaptability and resourcefulness. You notice the subtle social dynamics within the household. Everyone has a role, from tending the fire to checking stored food, feeding animals, and preparing meals. Children contribute where they can, learning through observation and small tasks. Evidence suggests that this distributed labour was essential, as winter's physical demands were relentless and no one could manage alone. Oddly enough, in some regions, children were even taught to monitor small ice caches, a responsibility that seems adult-like but ensured food safety and efficiency. The interplay between warmth, shelter, and sustenance is constant. You feel how the small hut, carefully arranged and maintained, creates a bubble of survival amidst the harsh world outside. Every detail, the placement of straw, the layering of hides, the proximity of the hearth to food storage serves a calculated purpose. Historians still argue whether these strategies were learned over centuries through trial and error, or if certain methods were formally taught within communities. But the results are evident in the rhythms of daily life. Evening settles slowly. The fire glows warmly, casting shadows on mud and straw walls. You pause to listen to the muffled sounds of the frozen village outside, the occasional bark, the soft steps of someone checking animals, and the whisper of wind through skeletal trees. The hut feels like a sanctuary, a carefully crafted balance of warmth, light, and shelter. Every small adjustment, every layered material, and every tiny trick learned from generations before contributes to a survival system as intricate as it is understated. You sit quietly, watching the flames. The knowledge of how to build, insulate, and maintain a home for winter survival is tangible here, held in the structure, in the smells, in the heat that embraces you. Oddly enough, these simple huts, humble though they may be, provide a comfort and stability that larger, more modern constructions often lack. A reminder that in the medieval winter, survival was an art, honed through observation, experimentation, and quiet intelligence. You tug your woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the coarse fabric brush against your skin as you move through the cold interior of your hut. Layering clothing was essential in winter, a principle learned from long experience. Evidence suggests that peasants commonly wore multiple tunics, thick woolen leggings, and cloaks, each piece contributing to insulation and mobility. Oddly enough, some families would even sew scraps of fur or hide into garments at points most vulnerable to wind, creating a patchwork of warmth that was both practical and resourceful. You notice how these layers shape movement, making each step feel deliberate, controlled. A gentle negotiation with the cold rather than a struggle. Hands and feet require special attention. You pull on gloves of soft leather or thick wool, while stockings are layered to trap heat around ankles and calves. Some villagers even stuffed straw into shoes or boots to provide additional insulation. Scholars continue to debate whether such measures were widespread or limited to households with slightly more resources, but the ingenuity is evident. You move slowly, feeling the weight and warmth of each layer, appreciating the sensory complexity that clothing added to daily life. Inside, your family checks on each other's garments, repairing small tears and patches before they worsen. You note that this maintenance is as much about survival as it is about thrift. extending the life of each article through careful mending. Evidence suggests that sewing skills were considered essential knowledge, passed down from parents to children with patience and attention to detail. Oddly enough, some families added small hidden pockets in clothing not for storage but to trap warm air. A subtle yet effective adaptation to extreme cold. The chill outside reinforces the necessity of these layers. Windows are tiny, walls thick with mud and wattle, and yet the wind manages to seep through gaps, finding weak points in construction. You realise how even small adjustments, folding extra cloth over joints in doors, layering rushes against walls, or tucking blankets around windows make a meaningful difference. Scholars continue to explore whether layering clothing alone was sufficient, or if architectural insulation was equally critical. But the combination of both seems to be the key to enduring the cold. Children, bundled in wool and fur, move quietly around the hearth. You observe how layering affects their play movements are slower, more deliberate, yet they are clearly warmed and protected. Oddly enough, some parents would hang extra cloaks near sleeping areas so the children could wrap themselves quickly if they awoke cold. This simple precaution reveals the constant vigilance required during winter, blending practicality with care. You glance outside and see neighbours adjusting their own garments, hats pulled low, mittens in place. The visual rhythm of layered clothing, fur-lined hoods, and wrapped scarves illustrates a shared understanding of the cold's threat. Evidence suggests that in certain regions, local weaving or spinning cooperatives produced wool specifically for winter wear, a subtle example of communal adaptation and ingenuity. Some researchers have questioned whether these specialised winter garments were common or a privilege of certain villages. But your eyes tell the story of necessity shaping creativity. Even mundane tasks like fetching water are influenced by clothing. You notice how the extra layers protect from frostbite but restrict flexibility, requiring slower, more calculated movements. Oddly enough, some villagers would tie strips of cloth around wrists and ankles to reduce heat loss, a practice that seems quaint but effectively retained warmth in extremities. You can imagine generations observing, experimenting, and passing down these small but vital techniques. Inside, the hearth radiates warmth, and you peel back a cloak to adjust layers closer to the fire. The tactile contrast between cold hands and the heat of wool against skin is profound, a constant reminder of the environment's extremes. Scholars continue to debate whether medieval layering methods were optimized for physical labor or merely for comfort, but the evidence suggests both were considered simultaneously. Each adjustment balances protection, dexterity, and endurance, a subtle dance of practicality. Your eyes wander over the family's sleeping arrangements. Blankets, fur pelts, and extra garments are strategically layered to retain warmth at night. Oddly enough, some households encouraged everyone to sleep close together, maximizing shared body heat. While modern sensibilities might question the lack of privacy, in the cold, communal sleeping was an effective, almost essential survival strategy. Evidence suggests that the layout of beds, the placement of blankets, and the inclusion of spare garments all reflected careful observation and experience. Throughout the day, clothing is adjusted repeatedly. Layers are added or removed based on activity, proximity to the hearth, or exposure to the outdoors. The sensory awareness required is subtle, yet constant, feeling drafts, detecting cold creeping into extremities, and responding before discomfort becomes dangerous. Oddly enough, some villagers even carried small bundles of spare cloth to wrap around hands or feet while performing brief outdoor tasks. A small but effective measure of protection. Scholars continue to explore how much these practices varied by region, climate, or social status, but the general principle of layered protection remains consistent. By evening, The effectiveness of layered clothing is evident. Family members move with relative ease, warmed by both fabric and fire. Prepared to face the long night ahead, you settle near the hearth, feeling the interplay of heat, texture, and sensory awareness. Realizing how clothing is not merely decoration or habit, but an essential strategy for endurance and survival, oddly enough. The simplest materials, wool, fur, leather, are transformed through observation and ingenuity into tools of resilience, demonstrating the quiet intelligence embedded in everyday life. The wind outside rattles small branches against the roof, but inside, warmth wraps around you like a protective cocoon. Each garment, carefully layered and maintained, contributes to a system of survival that spans generations. Scholars continue to examine how cultural practices influence clothing choices, yet the tactile evidence before you tells a clear story. Preparation, adaptation, and attention to detail were as critical as any rationed meal or stored vegetable in sustaining life through the harshest months. You step toward the barn, feeling the crisp air tighten around your lungs and the subtle crunch of frost underfoot. Inside, the smell of hay, manure, and warm animal bodies greets you, a familiar blend that speaks of both survival and comfort. Livestock care is more than a chore. It is a rhythm woven into every winter day. Records indicate that protecting animals during harsh months was essential, not only for immediate sustenance but for the ongoing productivity of the farm. Cows provide milk, pigs offer meat, and even chickens, with their small eggs, contribute vital nutrition when other sources run low. You run your hands through the straw bedding, noticing the animals huddling close together, generating a subtle warmth that permeates the barn. Curiously, in some regions, villagers would add extra straw over weaker animals or those recently ill, creating microclimates within the larger shelter. This seemingly simple gesture reflects a nuanced understanding of both physiology and environment, passed down through generations with careful observation. Scholars continue to explore whether these methods were standardized or developed locally according to microclimate differences. But the consistency in approach across villages is remarkable. Feeding routines are carefully managed. You scoop grain into troughs, mixing it with a small amount of water to prevent spillage or wastage. Interestingly, some households use kitchen scraps, such as vegetable peels or leftover porridge, to supplement feed, a practice that maximized resources while minimizing labor. It is easy to see why the barn becomes a central hub of activity during winter, a place of life and movement amid the frozen stillness outside. Water is another concern. Frozen streams or wells require ingenuity to keep animals hydrated. You carry buckets of water, warming them slightly near the hearth before heading back into the barn. Archaeological evidence shows that some communities constructed troughs close to central hearths in barns or even used small channels to allow partially melted ice to flow into feeding areas. Oddly enough, some families even monitored the snow accumulation on barn roofs, clearing excess to prevent collapse or using it as an informal water source when melted indoors. You notice the animals shifting, their breath rising in faint clouds, mixing with the earthy aroma of straw. Experts remain divided on whether certain heating techniques were widespread, such as hanging small bundles of dried herbs to provide mild warmth or using thick mats to insulate floors. Regardless, you can see how every small adjustment contributes to survival, forming a network of micro-strategies that collectively sustain both humans and animals through relentless winter conditions. As you settle into routine chores, you observe the subtle social dynamics of labor. Adults and children work together, distributing tasks according to skill and strength. One child sweeps the barn floor, another checks feed levels. While an adult monitors the animals and moves additional straw, there is an intuitive rhythm, almost musical in its cadence. and you realize that these tasks are teaching lessons as much as accomplishing them. Some researchers have questioned whether this division of labor arose out of necessity or emerged as an organized tradition. Yet the effect is undeniable. Efficiency and survival are enhanced by coordinated effort. Feeding and tending animals also intersects with hygiene. You notice that spent straw is replaced periodically, and barns are occasionally swept to reduce the build-up of waste. Medieval sources reveal that poor sanitation could quickly lead to disease, both for animals and humans, so even these mundane actions carry weighty consequences. Curiously, some peasants scattered a small amount of ash over floors, believing it absorbed moisture and minimized odors. It is a subtle, practical adaptation that reflects careful observation and experiential learning rather than superstition. Beyond sustenance, the barn provides heat and security. You step back to observe how the animals huddle in groups, creating pockets of warmth that radiate through the building. Evidence suggests that barns are often oriented and constructed with ventilation in mind, balancing airflow to prevent dampness while maintaining internal heat. Oddly enough, some families even place small partitions to protect weaker animals from winddrafts or bullying from larger livestock. An early form of micromanagement in agricultural practices, scholars continue to debate how common these partitions were, but regional variations suggest adaptation to both climate and herd behavior. The interaction between humans and animals creates subtle sensory cues that guide daily decisions. You notice how the lowing of cows, the shifting of pigs, or the clucking of hens signals hunger, discomfort, or movement readiness. Experts have explored how these nonverbal cues informed winter routines, and it becomes clear that attentive observation was just as important as physical labor. In some villages, children learn to read animals almost instinctively, identifying subtle behaviors that indicated stress or need. Evening falls, and the barn quiets except for occasional movement. You step outside briefly, feeling the contrast of cold air and the lingering warmth that the structure radiates. There is a rhythm to winter life here, a balance between tending the animals, managing resources, and observing the environment. It is a continuous interplay of attention, adaptation, and subtle ingenuity. Interestingly, some peasants would schedule feeding and chores around patterns of weather and temperature, a practice that shows sophisticated understanding of microclimates long before formal meteorology existed. As you return to the warmth of the hut, you notice how the barn's stability supports everything else: preserved food, hearth warmth, and family well-being. The animal's survival is intertwined with human survival, creating a web of interdependence that extends beyond mere necessity. Researchers continue to question whether livestock care routines were passed down formally or learned through daily participation. Yet the practical knowledge embedded in these practices is undeniable. Every task, every layer of straw, every measured scoop of feed represents a small triumph against winter's relentlessness. You pause near the doorway, listening to the faint echoes of livestock settling, the wind rattling branches, and the distant murmur of other families tending their barns. It is a quiet symphony of life persisting despite harsh conditions, each note a testament to observation, adaptation, and subtle intelligence. Oddly enough, even in these simple routines, creativity emerges. Straw arranged to direct warmth, leftover food transformed into supplemental feed, and microspaces within the barn optimized for survival. The world of medieval winter life, you realize, is a delicate balance of routine, innovation, and care, and the barn is one of its quiet pillars. You step into the forest edge, where the chill has a sharper bite and the wind rustles skeletal branches overhead. Fuel is running low in the village, and today's task is gathering firewood, a mundane yet vital activity for survival. Records indicate that wood was the primary source of heat and cooking fuel for most peasants, and shortages could turn the simplest winter day into a struggle. You scan the landscape, noting fallen branches and dead trees, each one a potential resource. Oddly enough, some villagers burned driftwood found along riverbanks or scavenged old fence posts, practices that may seem eccentric today, but were ingenious responses to scarcity. Carrying a bundle of sticks back toward the village, you feel the physical toll of even a short journey. Frost crunches underfoot, and every movement demands energy. Evidence suggests that rural households carefully rationed both wood and labour, assigning collection tasks based on strength and experience. Children often carried small bundles while adults managed larger loads, a subtle education in both responsibility and endurance. Scholars continue to debate whether such rationing was standardised or improvised, but the overall effect ensured that families could maintain warmth throughout the harsh months. You pause to inspect a particularly large fallen branch. It will take several strokes with an axe to split it into manageable pieces. Interestingly, some villagers kept axes or saws sharpened exclusively for winter use, while others employed clever wedges made of bone or hardwood to ease splitting. Even the tools themselves are part of the survival strategy, maintained with care to prevent wasting precious energy on blunt or broken implements. You feel the rhythm of chopping, the measured swing, the crack of wood splitting, a sound that is both satisfying and essential. The forest is silent except for your own labour and the occasional bird call, oddly enough. Some peasants would leave small markers along paths or stacks of branches to signal their way home in heavy snow. A practical adaptation that doubles as a navigational aid. Researchers continue to explore whether these practices were widespread or localised to regions prone to blizzards and deep snow. Either way, you can see the ingenuity in turning the environment into a guide rather than a hazard. Returning toward the village, you notice how families coordinate fuel collection. Evidence suggests that sharing information about accessible fallen trees or particularly dry branches was common, creating a quiet network of cooperation. Interestingly, some villages even set up communal woodpiles near central huts or barns, allowing everyone to draw from a shared resource. This reduced risk for individuals and reinforced social cohesion, a practical and cultural adaptation to winter challenges. Back at the hut, you stack wood carefully near the hearth, arranging it so that the larger logs are positioned for longer burn times and smaller kindling is easily accessible. Scholars continue to debate whether wood management followed formal rules or evolved through informal household experience. But the principles are intuitive accessibility, efficiency, and conservation. Oddly enough, some peasants even stored small caches of wood under snow to keep it dry, taking advantage of insulating properties while balancing accessibility. You take a moment to observe the faint smoke curling from neighbouring chimneys. Each plume represents a household successfully managing its fuel. An unspoken competition and cooperation in balance. Evidence suggests that villagers often timed chopping and collection according to temperature, wind, and snow depth, maximizing energy efficiency and safety. Interestingly, some families scheduled wood gathering for midday when the sun provided a slight boost in warmth, a subtle integration of natural rhythms into survival strategies. Inside, you notice the subtle interplay between firewood and household warmth. The hearth consumes fuel slowly, and the arrangement of logs dictates the heat output. Oddly enough, some families would rotate logs during the night, placing the smaller pieces toward the centre to maintain consistent warmth while conserving larger logs for morning tasks. Researchers have explored whether these rotations were systematic or instinctive, but they reveal careful attention to both material and environmental conditions. Children help by carrying small kindling from storage areas, learning both coordination and timing. Their contributions are subtle yet meaningful, and evidence suggests that training children in wood management was a standard aspect of winter preparation. One unusual practice involved children stacking twigs in geometric patterns to allow air to circulate better, improving burn efficiency. Such small innovations illustrate how observation and experimentation were embedded in daily labour. By evening, the hut feels warmer, the fire steady, and the woodpile sufficient for the night. Oddly enough, the combination of careful collection, storage, and usage transforms what could have been a desperate struggle into a manageable rhythm. Scholars continue to explore regional variations, but the principles remain consistent: anticipate scarcity, conserve energy, and integrate both household and environmental knowledge into everyday survival. You sit near the hearth, feeling the contrast of cold outside and warmth inside, appreciating how fuel management shapes the entire winter experience. You settle back into the hut, listening to the soft murmur of snow shifting on the roof and the distant lowing of cows. Winter illnesses are never far from a peasant's mind, and you notice how every layer of clothing, every well-tended hearth, and every rationed meal works together to keep sickness at bay. Medieval sources reveal that cold, damp conditions could easily exacerbate coughs, fevers, and joint pain, making prevention a constant concern. Interestingly, some households kept small bundles of dried herbs near sleeping areas, both for fragrance and for what was believed to be protective properties against illness. It seems curious now, yet in the absence of modern medicine, these subtle measures offered both comfort and a psychological sense of control. You observe how nutrition and warmth intersect in daily routines. Meals are simple but designed to sustain energy: porridge thickened with grains, small amounts of salted or smoked meat, and preserved vegetables form the core diet. Records indicate that maintaining adequate caloric intake was critical, especially for those who had to perform physically demanding tasks like chopping wood or hauling water. Oddly enough, some families would add small amounts of ash or finely crushed bones to bread dough, believing it improved flavour or preserved nutrients. Scholars continue to debate whether these additions had any real nutritional effect, yet their use reflects a willingness to experiment within practical limits. Caring for the sick is a subtle art. You note small rituals, such as adding extra blankets, positioning patients near the hearth, or supplying warm broth. Evidence suggests that these practices were both practical and culturally significant, providing comfort and a sense of attentiveness. In some villages, children were taught to monitor weak or ill family members, learning observation skills that were essential for winter survival. Oddly enough, some communities kept small warm boxes filled with heated stones, wrapped in cloth to provide localized warmth for those suffering chills. An inventive solution to the challenges of heating a drafty space. Outside, the wind rattles branches against walls, and the snow continues its gentle descent. You see how illness was not just a household concern, but a community one. Records indicate that knowledge of remedies, herbal treatments, and care techniques was often shared among neighbours, particularly in isolated hamlets. Experts have explored whether formalised instructions existed or if the practice relied on informal observation. But either way, communal memory shaped responses to winter ailments. Water, food, and warmth converge in the management of health. Melted snow or thawed ice provides drinking water, while soups and stews deliver both hydration and nutrition. Evidence suggests that maintaining fluid intake was critical to avoid dehydration during periods of exertion outside, even in cold weather. Curiously, some peasants kept small amounts of ale or weak beer as a source of calories and to encourage fluid consumption, an approach that combined practicality with local custom. You notice the subtle attention paid to cleanliness. Straw bedding is refreshed, cooking utensils are scrubbed, and floors swept, all with the aim of minimizing the spread of disease. Oddly enough, some villagers sprinkled a thin layer of ash across floors to absorb moisture and reduce odours, a practice that also had the side effect of limiting parasites. Scholars continue to debate how widespread such techniques were and whether they significantly affected illness rates. Yet the effort reflects an understanding of environmental hygiene long before germ theory. Children play quietly, often near the hearth, while observing adults tend to meals and chores. They learn the interplay between warmth, food, and health without formal instruction, absorbing habits that will carry them through future winters. One unusual practice involved teaching children to recognize early signs of cold-related ailments, such as discoloration in fingers or lips, so that preventative measures could be taken. This subtle training emphasizes observation, patience, and the interconnectedness of household routines. The night draws closer, and you watch as family members rotate firewood, check on livestock through the windows, and adjust bedding. Evidence suggests that maintaining consistent indoor temperature was a continuous task, requiring vigilance from every member of the household. Interestingly, some families place small clay pots with hot coals near doorways or sleeping areas, warming entryways and sleeping surfaces simultaneously. This practical solution reflects the layered thinking that defines medieval winter survival. Every small action has multiple benefits. You pause to listen to the quiet rhythm of the village. Even the hush carries lessons. Footsteps across packed snow signal neighbours' movements. Distant animal noises indicate normalcy or concern, and the crackle of firewood offers reassurance. Experts remain divided on the effectiveness of certain herbal remedies for winter illnesses, yet the combination of warmth, nutrition, and attentive care clearly forms a protective buffer. Each measure is small but accumulates into a coherent survival strategy. As you settle near the hearth yourself, you feel the complex orchestration of daily life around you. Warmth, nutrition, vigilance, and observation all intertwine to sustain life in conditions that are relentless and often unforgiving. Oddly enough, even in this simple setting, creativity and experimentation are visible, from improvised heating methods to herbal concoctions. Each small innovation contributes to the household's resilience. The quiet diligence of winter life continues, a rhythm of care, attention, and subtle ingenuity that has been refined over generations. You trudge through the snow-laden yard, feeling the frozen ground crunch beneath each careful step. Daily chores take on a new weight in winter, with every motion demanding extra energy and thought. Documentation shows that peasants adapted their routines to conserve both warmth and strength, often combining tasks or timing them for the warmest parts of the day. You notice how small actions, like layering extra straw on the ground before carrying water, reduce exposure and effort, a subtle choreography of survival that has been refined over generations. Fetching water is particularly arduous. Wells may be partially frozen, and buckets must be thawed before use. Some villagers would carry snow back to the hearth to melt, while others created small channels from nearby streams to direct partially melted ice into containers. Interestingly, children often assisted in these efforts, learning to gauge snow quality, measure water accurately, and anticipate hazards on icy paths. This practical instruction doubles as both labour and education, preparing them for years of winter survival ahead. Returning inside with your small cache of melted snow, you pause to watch the hearth glow and flicker. Evidence points to the hearth as the centre of all domestic activity, a source of light, warmth, and sustenance. You stir a simmering pot of porridge, noticing how the steam curls upward in gentle tendrils, carrying the earthy aroma of grains and root vegetables. Some families would even hang small bundles of herbs nearby, both for fragrance and for believed medicinal benefits. Unusually, in certain villages, People place these herb bundles near sleeping areas, blending comfort, care, and superstition into a single practice. Outside, the wind rattles skeletal branches and piles of snow. Experts remain uncertain about how standardized winter routines were across different regions. But observations suggest that families closely monitored both weather and resources. Trips to gather firewood, check on animals, or harvest small game were carefully choreographed to maximize efficiency while minimizing exposure. You notice footprints in the snow that mark paths familiar to all, worn from repeated use, guiding travelers safely across what might otherwise be a treacherous landscape. Feeding animals during winter requires attention to detail. Grain and straw must be rationed carefully, and water must remain accessible despite freezing temperatures. Historical interpretations vary concerning whether barns were heated in any formal sense or relied solely on animal-generated warmth. You observe cows huddling together, their breath creating faint clouds in the cold air. An unexpected practice involved some villagers insulating weaker animals with extra layers of straw or animal hides. A small but crucial intervention that underscores ingenuity and attentiveness. Inside, you check on preserved foods. Documentation shows that rotation of stored items was critical to prevent spoilage, particularly for root vegetables and salted meat. Oddly enough, some households even use small bundles of straw as separators between different layers of food, creating insulation and reducing contact with moisture. Scholars have explored whether such methods were widespread or localized, but they clearly demonstrate practical problem-solving and careful observation of materials at hand. Children play quietly near the fire while assisting in small chores. Academic perspectives differ on how formal their training was. Yet it is evident that observation and imitation provided practical skills measuring water, stacking wood, or checking food supplies. Unusually, some children were taught to note subtle environmental cues, like the colour of ice on a well surface, which indicated safety or danger. These small lessons blend work, play, and survival, a rhythm attuned to the demands of a harsh season. As evening approaches, shadows stretch across snow-covered fields. You feel the quiet weight of time passing slowly, marked by routine and necessity. Some studies suggest that villagers intentionally staggered chores, alternating indoor and outdoor work to maintain energy levels and warmth. Evidence points to the subtle integration of labour, social observation, and environmental awareness as essential components of winter life. Interestingly, some households even synchronize their schedules with neighbours to facilitate shared tasks, such as hauling ice or firewood, highlighting both community and efficiency. You pause near the hearth, feeling the warmth seep through layers of clothing and absorbing the soft, steady rhythm of domestic life. It is a delicate balance managing resources, monitoring health, tending animals, and sustaining the fire. Researchers have explored how small choices from layering clothing to arranging household spaces compounded to make survival possible. The quiet diligence of these routines, repeated day after day, is a testament to human adaptability in the face of relentless cold. By nightfall, the fire glows steadily, animals are fed, water is secured, and provisions are rotated for maximum efficiency. Oddly enough, the simple combination of routine, observation, and subtle innovation turns what could be a brutal struggle into a sustainable rhythm. Evidence points to these small strategies collectively forming a survival framework, one that required foresight, patience, and keen attention to the environment. You sit back near the hearth, inhaling the mingled scents of smoke, food, and straw, and feel the calm assurance that winter, though harsh, can be endured with knowledge, care, and quiet persistence. You trudge along the snow-packed trail toward the far edge of the village, the cold tugging at your fingers and cheeks, roads and paths vanish under frost and drifting snow, making travel a careful endeavour. Evidence points to the fact that peasants often limited outdoor excursions during harsh winter months, timing trips for daylight and milder weather. You notice the subtle marks of previous travellers, packed tracks indicating where movement is safest, and you follow them with a quiet respect for centuries of accumulated knowledge. Curiously, some villagers would tie small strips of cloth to branches along paths as guides, an improvised navigation system to reduce the risk of losing direction in heavy snow. The task today is to check on distant livestock pens and gather any forage that may have blown off nearby fields. Records suggest that maintaining animals during winter required constant vigilance, with careful attention to feeding, warmth, and shelter. Oddly enough, some families would spread hay along fences to act as windbreaks, providing additional protection for animals while supplementing their food supply. Academic perspectives differ on how common such techniques were, but the principle of combining protection with sustenance is evident. You pause near a frozen stream, breaking small chunks of ice to provide water for the sheep. Researchers have explored the ingenious methods villagers developed to ensure hydration for both humans and animals, such as melting ice near hearths or creating insulated containers. Interestingly, some peasants added a small handful of ash or sand to the ice to prevent it from refreezing too quickly in containers, a minor adjustment that reflects careful observation and practical experimentation. Walking back toward the village, the snow begins to fall more heavily, softening sounds and muting colours. You notice the careful layering of clothing, the heavy boots, woolen cloaks, and hats, all essential for maintaining warmth on these treks. Evidence shows that layered clothing was a critical adaptation, allowing movement while retaining heat. Some unusual practices included wrapping straw or extra fabric around wrists and ankles for added insulation, a technique passed down through generations without formal instruction. Back in the village, you observe neighbours coordinating tasks. Contemporary accounts indicate that winter labour was often shared. Hauling firewood, tending animals, and checking water sources were communal activities. Oddly enough, some households synchronized trips for efficiency and safety, particularly during periods of heavy snow or icy winds. Scholars continue to debate how formal these arrangements were, but coordination clearly reduced risk and spread labour across multiple hands. You return to the hearth, feeling the welcome warmth seep through your gloves and layers. Food is being prepared, water is secured, and animals are checked, forming a rhythm that balances domestic needs with environmental challenges. Interestingly, some families saved small portions of cooked grains or broth to carry along during long outdoor tasks, a form of portable sustenance that also provided brief warmth and comfort. Researchers have explored how such small innovations contributed to overall resilience, emphasizing the role of observation and experimentation in survival strategies. Children move carefully through snow, learning by observation how to adjust their gait on icy surfaces, how to carry small loads, and when to seek warmth near the fire. Documentation shows that this practical education was essential learning to judge snow depth, ice stability, and weather cues prepared them for independent survival in future winters. Oddly enough, some children were taught to mark paths with sticks or stones, a method of navigation that seems quaint today but was highly effective in blinding snow conditions. The evening sun dips low, and shadows stretch across the frozen landscape. Experts remain uncertain about the prevalence of certain safety strategies, such as path markers or designated route guides. Yet what you observe suggests a combination of instinct, learned practice, and communal knowledge. Each step, each bundle of firewood, and each observation of animal behaviour reflects careful consideration of energy, safety, and necessity. Inside the hut, the hearth glows steadily, casting shadows on walls lined with straw and mud. You notice how attention to detail stockpiled provisions, layered clothing, carefully tended animals creates a stable environment despite the freezing temperatures outside. Academic interpretations vary concerning the balance between communal and household-based strategies, but it is clear that both forms of organization enhance survival. Unusually, some families kept small vials of herbs or preserved remedies near the hearth, combining practical medicine with warmth, creating a subtle, multi-purpose survival toolkit. You sit near the fire, feeling the convergence of warmth, sustenance, and quiet accomplishment. The day's labor, though physically demanding, reinforces the rhythm of winter life: careful observation, cooperative effort, and small innovations all converge to sustain both humans and animals. Evidence points to the integration of these strategies as essential, demonstrating how survival depended not just on individual effort but on accumulated knowledge, attentiveness, and community cohesion. Even in this simple setting, ingenuity is everywhere, visible in the layering of materials, the arrangement of provisions, and the subtle methods used to endure cold and isolation. You move quietly around the hut, the air filled with a mixed sense of simmering stew, smoke, and straw, each aroma signaling both nourishment and security. Cooking during winter is not a simple task. Contemporary accounts indicate that maintaining consistent heat and moisture in food was crucial to prevent spoilage and sustain energy throughout long days. You stir the pot slowly, feeling the warmth radiate through the metal and into your hands, a small yet profound comfort. Interestingly, some villagers would add small amounts of ash or crushed bones to bread dough or porridge, believing it improved texture or added nutrients, a practice that blends practicality with subtle experimentation. The hearth is the center of both domestic life and social rhythm. You notice children sitting near the fire, learning tasks by observation, stirring, measuring, and preparing ingredients with careful guidance from adults. Records suggest that these informal apprenticeships were essential in transmitting survival skills, from basic cooking to the management of fuel and provisions. Oddly enough, some households kept small clay pots with hot embers nearby, not only to maintain warmth but also to aid in slow cooking and the gentle warming of food over several hours. Water management intersects closely with cooking. Frozen streams and wells require constant attention, and melted snow is used judiciously. Evidence points to households carefully rationing water for both cooking and cleaning, ensuring that no effort or resource is wasted. Some unusual practices included using snow to wash vegetables, or adding a thin layer of straw insulation around containers to prevent freezing. These small innovations demonstrate how observation and creativity shaped daily routines, turning scarcity into manageable practice. You glance outside and see neighbours tending similar chores, moving between huts and barns in coordinated rhythm. Historical interpretations vary concerning how formal these labour schedules were, but it is clear that communal patterns reduced risk and helped distribute energy expenditure. Interestingly, some villages shared knowledge of particular firewood types that burned longer or produced more consistent heat, a subtle form of community resource optimization. You feel the quiet pulse of survival strategies extending beyond the individual household, a network of tacit knowledge operating through observation and shared experience. Feeding routines continue alongside cooking. You refill troughs with grains mixed with water, ensuring that animals are nourished and hydrated. Evidence suggests that these practices were critical not only for immediate sustenance, but for maintaining long-term health of livestock, which in turn sustained human nutrition. Oddly enough, some peasants would sprinkle salt in small amounts to encourage water consumption or preserve feed longer, a method that highlights subtle attention to detail in seemingly mundane tasks. Children move carefully between chores and play near the hearth, learning practical skills alongside social cooperation. Records indicate that this dual purpose, education and labour, was a cornerstone of winter survival. Unusually, some families taught children to observe subtle cues, like the colour of animal fur or ice thickness on nearby wells, to anticipate issues before they became urgent. These lessons blend instinct, observation, and hands-on practice, emphasizing the integration of knowledge into daily life. The sensory environment is constant: the crackle of firewood, the soft hiss of simmering liquids, the faint creak of walls as they respond to shifting temperatures. Researchers have explored how these environmental cues were used to judge resource needs, from adjusting food quantities to adding fuel before the fire dimmed. Interestingly, some households arrange their cooking spaces to allow maximum warmth for both people and animals, effectively creating a small, insulated ecosystem around the hearth. Evening descends slowly, painting frost on the windows in delicate patterns. Academic perspectives differ concerning the balance between routine and improvisation in winter cooking. Yet observation of actual practices reveals a delicate orchestration: food is rotated, water is managed, fuel is conserved, and warmth is optimized. Oddly enough, some villagers even use small bundles of aromatic herbs to flavor stews and preserve air quality. Blending nutrition, comfort, and sensory enhancement in one simple action. As you settle near the hearth, watching the food bubble gently, you feel the convergence of skill, care, and ingenuity. Every action, from stirring porridge to refilling water or adding fuel, represents a carefully honed response to environmental pressures. Evidence suggests that such routines, repeated and refined over generations, created a framework for survival that was as much about attention and creativity as it was about raw labour. You inhale the mixed scents, feeling the warmth seep through layers of clothing, and appreciate the understated intelligence embedded in even the simplest tasks. By nightfall, the hearth glows steadily, food is prepared, water secured, and animals fed. Unusually, the subtle layering of efforts cooking, warmth, and observation creates a buffer against the relentless cold outside. Researchers have examined how small, interconnected strategies like these form the backbone of peasant survival, showing that even in harsh conditions, methodical care and ingenuity ensured life continued. You lean back, absorbing the combined comfort of heat, nourishment, and quiet domestic rhythm, realizing how profoundly these routines shaped the experience of medieval winter. You walk slowly through the snow-dusted streets of the district, lantern light flickering faintly against the frost-covered walls. The evening feels quieter than the day, almost reverent, as though the entire village is holding its breath. Records reveal that many streets and pathways became nearly deserted after sunset, with activity concentrated near hearths and communal gathering spaces. You notice the hush is not emptiness, but a measured stillness, where each step echoes softly against packed snow and cobblestones, reminding you how the world contracts in winter. Doors are closed, windows drawn tight, and a faint aroma of wood smoke drifts into the crisp air. Interestingly, some villagers would leave small scraps of firewood outside for quick access or as signals to neighbours that warmth was maintained. A subtle form of communication blending practicality with social awareness. You pass a shuttered bakery, its lingering scent of bread faint but comforting, hinting at routines that persisted even as the streets emptied. Archaeological evidence shows that many shops and homes were oriented to retain heat efficiently, with narrow entrances and thick walls preserving warmth for the night. You notice the occasional movement, a figure hurrying to finish chores before darkness, or a child returning from tending animals with careful steps. It is unclear whether these routines were strictly enforced by social expectation or simply learned through necessity, yet the rhythm is undeniable. The fading light and quieted activity seem to amplify each sound: the distant clatter of a door, the crunch of ice under boots, the soft flapping of a bird finding shelter, curiously. Some households placed lanterns at thresholds not to guide themselves, but to mark safe paths for neighbours, creating a network of subtle signals that communicated safety and presence. The district feels folded inward. The bustling energy of daytime dissolved into gentle echoes. Scholars have examined how villages adjusted their spatial use in winter, noting that communal spaces shrank while private domestic areas gained significance. You step past a small fountain now frozen solid, its trickle silenced by frost. Some villagers would chip ice from wells or fountains for household use, an unusual yet necessary method to supplement limited water supplies. Studies suggest these small interventions were widely understood, passed down through observation and trial rather than formal instruction. Lanterns glow softly in windows, casting long shadows across walls and streets. Records reveal that winter nights were socially constricted, with most people confined to their homes for warmth and safety. You hear faint music drifting from a shuttered building, perhaps a piano or simple strings, slowed in tempo and fading unpredictably. Curiously, in some households, music served a dual purpose: entertainment and a way to mark time, keeping rhythm in long evenings when chores were complete but darkness lingered. Researchers have explored whether music was a common household practice or reserved for wealthier villagers, but evidence shows it permeated daily life in small but meaningful ways. You pause to feel the chill in the air, sensing how it has reshaped patterns of movement. Pathways are consolidated, footprints packed down, and the snow muffles sound, creating an almost sacred quiet. Historical interpretations vary concerning the extent to which villagers adapted to these conditions through social organization versus individual experience. Yet what you see is a seamless blend of both. Oddly enough, some families would leave small caches of dried food or fire-starting materials near common paths, a proactive preparation for anyone caught outside after dark. The wind carries soft hints of smoke, food, and frozen earth, blending into a sensory tapestry that marks the night. You notice how households are arranged to maximize warmth, with shared walls and clustered structures reducing exposure to cold. Records reveal that tight spatial organization and thoughtful orientation of buildings were practical adaptations to the harsh climate, ensuring minimal heat loss and safety for people and animals alike. An unusual method involved creating small windbreaks from bundled reeds or stones around entrances, subtly channeling airflow away from vulnerable areas. Children's laughter occasionally punctuates the quiet, echoing softly against walls, a reminder that even in folded, subdued evenings, life persists. Experts remain divided on whether nighttime routines were more governed by social norms or environmental necessity. Yet the observed patterns suggest a careful balance of both. You feel the rhythm of the village in winter, a blend of careful movement, attention to surroundings, and small innovations that collectively create security and continuity. By the time you return to the warmth of the hut, the streets are nearly still. Snow has drifted in small mounds along paths. Lanterns sway gently in window panes, and the village exhales a quiet contentment born of adaptation. Interestingly, even in apparent silence, life continues through subtle signs: smoke curling from chimneys, animals rustling in barns, and faint footsteps signaling preparedness and vigilance. You lean against the doorframe, absorbing the interplay of light, sound, and movement, understanding how spatial awareness, routine, and ingenuity transform winter from a season of hardship into one of managed resilience. You trudge through the open fields, the frozen earth crunching beneath each careful step. and feel the bite of winter air on your face. Winter in 1786 had a way of making every motion deliberate, and you notice how villagers adjusted routines to conserve energy. Records indicate that families rationed physical labour based on weather conditions, completing the most demanding tasks during brief periods of sunlight or warmth. Curiously, some peasants would stagger chores, alternating between indoor work and outdoor excursions, a subtle rhythm designed to balance effort with survival. You approach the root cellars, low structures partially buried in earth, their entrances braced with straw and timber. Contemporary accounts indicate that storing vegetables underground helped regulate temperature and humidity, prolonging the life of turnips, cabbages, and carrots, interestingly. Some households added layers of sand or dry leaves atop the root mounds to enhance insulation. This simple adaptation required careful observation and patience, a small innovation that could mean the difference between sustenance and scarcity during the long winter months. Walking toward the barn, you notice the soft murmur of animals shifting in straw bedding, their breath creating faint clouds in the frigid air. Evidence points to the careful design of winter enclosures, oriented to reduce drafts and maximize retained heat. Some unusual practices included piling extra straw around weaker animals or creating low partitions to shield them from cold winds. Researchers have examined whether such practices were universal or limited to particular regions. But the ingenuity and attentiveness are clear. You carry a small bucket of water, partially thawed over the hearth, and notice how snow and ice are repurposed to sustain both people and animals. Scholars continue to debate whether households relied more on snow collection or river ice. Yet the dual approach demonstrates flexibility and adaptability, oddly enough. Some peasants would insulate water containers with straw or cloth to delay freezing, a minor but critical adjustment in maintaining accessibility during long, harsh nights. Inside the home, you stir a thick stew, the aroma filling the hut with warmth and reassurance. Archaeological evidence shows that slow-cooked meals were a cornerstone of winter sustenance, providing calories, hydration, and comfort. Interestingly, some families incorporated small amounts of preserved fruit or herbs to enhance flavor and nutritional value. These subtle additions reflect a balance of practicality and creativity, where even minor variations could improve morale and overall well-being. You glance at the sleeping arrangements, layered with blankets, fur, and straw mats. Records reveal that communal sleeping was common, not merely for social comfort but to maximize shared warmth. An unusual method involved placing small hot stones and cloth near sleeping areas, providing residual heat throughout the night. Experts remain uncertain about the prevalence of this practice, but the combination of physical and environmental measures clearly helped households endure extreme cold. You step outside briefly to check on stored firewood. Snow has drifted around the pile, and you notice how careful stacking and sheltering preserve wood for longer periods. Contemporary accounts indicate that maintaining dry fuel was as essential as tending animals or preserving food. Interestingly, some families would cover logs with straw, tarps, or clay to protect them from moisture, a practical yet resourceful solution to winter challenges. Scholars continue to explore how regional variations influence these methods, but the principle of preservation through observation and innovation is universal. Walking back, you notice distant neighbours performing similar tasks, collecting water, feeding livestock, and checking root cellars. Evidence points to shared knowledge within communities, with practices observed and adapted across households. Oddly enough, some villages created informal signals, such as smoke patterns or small fires, to communicate status or safety across distances. These subtle techniques highlight the interplay of communication, observation, and ingenuity in managing winter survival. The evening light softens, shadows stretching across frozen fields and frost-lined structures. Researchers have examined how environmental awareness shaped the daily rhythm of winter life, emphasizing timing, coordination, and subtle adjustments. You pause to take in the sensory landscape, the crunch of snow, the smell of smoke, the faint warmth of the hearth, and the muted sound of animals in straw. Each element contributes to a delicate equilibrium, a coordinated system of labor, observation, and adaptation that sustains life even in harsh conditions. Returning to the hut, you feel the cumulative effect of the day's work and the quiet orchestration of survival strategies. Contemporary accounts indicate that even minor improvements, insulating a water container, stacking straw for heat, or rotating root vegetables enhanced endurance over weeks of cold. Curiously, the combination of preparation, observation, and creative adaptation transforms what could be a relentless struggle into a manageable, almost rhythmic experience. You settle near the hearth, appreciating the layered complexity of winter life and the subtle intelligence embedded in everyday routines. You step quietly through the village, the late afternoon sun casting long, cold shadows across snow-covered roofs and frozen pathways. Winter isolation is profound, yet you notice how social structures and routines adapt to these months of confinement. Records reveal that the church often played a vital role in sustaining peasant communities during the coldest periods, providing food, advice, and occasional shelter. Interestingly, some villagers would time trips to receive aid alongside routine chores, minimizing exposure while accessing vital resources. You can sense the subtle choreography of necessity and social connection shaping every movement. The church itself exudes warmth, both physical and communal. Evidence points to the use of fires in small chapels or heated hearths near meeting areas, creating temporary relief from the pervasive cold. Some unusual practices included placing bundles of straw near benches or around doorways to shield parishioners from drafts, blending ritual with practical comfort. Scholars continue to debate whether these adaptations were common across regions or tailored to local climate and resources. Yet the principle of combining social and environmental knowledge is clear. You move toward a neighbour's home, noting the faint smells of bread and boiling stew drifting through the crisp air. Contemporary accounts indicate that food sharing between households was an essential survival strategy, particularly during periods of scarcity. Oddly enough, some families preserved small portions of salted or smoked meat specifically for neighbours who had suffered shortages, a simple but powerful act of community solidarity. Researchers have examined how such practices reinforced social cohesion and reduced individual risk in harsh winters. Inside your own hut, you check the animals again. Cows, pigs, and chickens huddle together for warmth, their presence radiating heat that contributes to household comfort. Evidence shows that close proximity between humans and livestock was both practical and strategic, as shared warmth reduced fuel consumption. Some villagers would build low partitions or use extra straw to create microclimates within barns, subtly enhancing comfort and safety for weaker animals. Scholars remain divided on how widespread these interventions were, but the ingenuity of observed practices is undeniable. The routine of tending animals, feeding, and checking stored provisions continues in rhythm with daylight. You notice how small tasks, stacking firewood, rotating vegetables, and monitoring water combine to create a structured pattern that governs the day. Interestingly, children are active participants, learning to observe, anticipate, and respond to subtle cues, the colour of ice in a trough, the sounds of shuffling animals, or the temperature changes in storage areas. This hands-on education blends work, learning, and survival seamlessly. You pause near the hearth, letting warmth seep into your gloves and clothing, Records indicate that multi-use domestic spaces were critical during winter, serving as centres for cooking, drying clothes, mending garments, and social interaction. Some unusual practices involved hanging herbs near the hearth to improve air quality or preserve stored foods. Researchers have explored whether such strategies were practical, symbolic, or both, highlighting the creative solutions peasants developed in response to environmental constraints. Outside, snow drifts softly over paths and fences, muffling sound and slowing movement. Experts remain uncertain about the exact extent of winter mobility, yet evidence suggests that even brief excursions required careful planning, layered clothing, and attention to environmental cues. Curiously, some villagers left small tokens, such as sticks or stones, to mark safe routes or hidden resources, an improvised mapping system born from experience. These subtle markers underscore the importance of observation, memory, and ingenuity in daily life. Returning to domestic space, you stir a pot of porridge and examine preserved vegetables. Contemporary accounts indicate that careful rotation and monitoring of stored food was essential to prevent spoilage. Interestingly, some households created small insulating covers for jars or baskets, often using straw or cloth, a minor but effective adaptation to protect sustenance during extreme cold. Scholars have examined regional variations in these storage techniques, revealing a rich tapestry of localized knowledge and subtle experimentation. As evening descends, the village enters a quieter rhythm. Footsteps are fewer, animal movements are subdued, and the smoke from chimneys creates a faint, unifying aroma. Evidence shows that villagers relied on these cues to judge safety and communal activity, reinforcing both social cohesion and survival awareness. Oddly enough, some families maintain small fire caches outside to signal occupancy or provide emergency warmth. A subtle method blending communication, practicality, and preparedness. Finally, you settle near the hearth, reflecting on the intertwined routines that sustain life through winter tending animals, preparing food, managing water, maintaining warmth, and observing both environment and neighbours. Researchers have examined these combined strategies, noting how small, cumulative actions create a resilient system of survival. You breathe in the warmth and smell of cooking, feeling the layered complexity of daily life, and understand how knowledge, care, and subtle innovation transform hardship into a sustainable rhythm, preparing the village to endure yet another long, harsh season. You step outside into the crisp air, the frozen ground crunching beneath your boots as you head toward the edge of the village. Travel during winter is slow and deliberate, with paths often obscured by drifting snow or icy patches. Records show that peasants adjusted their movements carefully, timing excursions for daylight hours and more favourable temperatures. You notice how each footprint is deliberate, marking a trail that others can follow safely. Curiously, some villagers would leave small bundles of straw or sticks as markers, guiding themselves or neighbours along frequently travelled routes when snow made paths invisible. The isolation of winter is palpable as you walk, yet the village functions as a network of interdependent routines. Evidence suggests that even small interactions, such as checking on a neighbour's livestock or exchanging firewood, helped reinforce survival strategies. Interestingly, some families maintained emergency caches of food, water, or fire-starting materials along common paths, anticipating the possibility of being caught in deep snow or sudden storms. You can feel how these subtle measures, though small, mitigate risk and build resilience. You approach a distant barn, the animals inside huddled closely for warmth. Contemporary accounts indicate that maintaining livestock in winter required constant observation, particularly for signs of illness or exposure. Some unusual practices involved placing low partitions or adding extra straw to protect weaker animals from wind and cold drafts. Researchers have examined whether these adaptations were standardized or improvised. But the careful attention to animal welfare is clear. As you carry water from a partially thawed stream, you notice how frozen surfaces dictate careful steps. It is contested whether snow collection or river ice provided the primary water source, yet evidence points to a combination of both, depending on location and climate. Oddly enough, some villagers would mix a bit of ash or straw in containers to prevent ice from forming too quickly. A minor but practical solution. You sense the rhythm of repeated observation and adaptation shaping daily life, turning environmental challenge into manageable tasks. Returning toward the village, you pass other households engaged in similar routines, stacking firewood, checking provisions, and tending animals. Historical interpretations vary concerning the degree to which neighbours coordinated activities, yet patterns suggest that informal cooperation was common, spreading knowledge and reducing individual burden. Interestingly, small signals, such as smoke from chimneys or the position of lanterns, communicated activity or readiness, subtly linking households across the snowy landscape. Inside your hut, you inspect stored root vegetables and grains, checking for signs of spoilage. Archaeological evidence suggests that careful rotation and inspection were key strategies for preserving food during extended winters. Some unusual practices involve layering straw between baskets or jars, creating insulation and reducing moisture contact. Researchers have explored how these methods varied across regions, revealing localized innovations shaped by both necessity and accumulated experience. Children assist quietly, observing as much as they participate. Records indicate that young members of the household learned essential skills by watching adults managing firewood, monitoring livestock, handling water, and maintaining food stores. Curiously, some families taught children to recognize subtle environmental signs, like shifts in frost patterns or wind direction, which indicated potential hazards or opportunities. This combination of observation and hands-on experience cultivated early survival instincts. The sun dips toward the horizon, casting elongated shadows across snow-laden fields. Scholars remain divided on the prevalence of synchronized routines across villages. Yet what you witness suggests a balance of individual and communal adaptation. Oddly enough, some families maintain small fire pits outside for emergencies, combining practicality with social signalling and safety. Back at the hearth, you stir a pot of stew, the gentle aroma filling the hut. Contemporary accounts indicate that slow-cooked meals provided both nourishment and warmth, their preparation closely tied to the management of fuel and labour. Researchers have examined how subtle variations such as timing, layering ingredients, or adjusting flame intensity enhanced efficiency and sustainability. You inhale the comforting scent, feeling the rhythm of domestic life as it quietly orchestrates survival during the harshest months. As evening settles, the village softens into a hushed pattern of activity. Evidence shows that households rotated tasks to preserve energy, maintain warmth, and ensure that both people and animals were cared for. Interestingly, even the smallest routines, rotating logs, layering straw, or checking water, form a network of strategies that cumulatively support life. You settle near the hearth, sensing the integration of observation, effort, and subtle ingenuity that transforms winter from relentless hardship into a structured, enduring rhythm. You step lightly across the frozen yard, the crisp air filling your lungs and the snow crunching rhythmically underfoot. Winter hunting is one of the few ways to supplement a peasant's diet during the lean months, and contemporary accounts indicate that small game provided essential protein when preserved food dwindled. You notice the careful observation required tracks in snow, subtle disturbances of brush, and faint sounds of birds alert hunters to possible prey. Interestingly, some villagers would set simple snares along familiar paths or near hedgerows, combining ingenuity with patience to catch rabbits or birds with minimal effort. Carrying a small catch back toward the village, you feel the mixture of satisfaction and relief. Records show that hunting required both skill and knowledge of the environment. Success was not guaranteed. And misjudging terrain or weather could mean wasted energy, oddly enough. Some households would use decoys or small noises to lure birds closer, a method that seems whimsical today but proved effective in increasing the food supply. Scholars continue to debate how widespread such techniques were, though evidence suggests regional adaptations based on available wildlife and terrain. You pause to examine a frozen pond, its surface opaque and brittle. Experts remain divided on how often villagers relied on ice fishing versus hunting terrestrial animals. But both strategies illustrate the creative exploitation of available resources. Some unusual practices included digging small holes in thin ice to access trapped fish or monitoring animal tracks around water sources. Demonstrating careful observation and planning, you realize how every small action is guided by experience, memory, and an acute awareness of seasonal patterns. As you move through snow-laden underbrush, you notice how animals' behavior signals environmental changes. Contemporary accounts indicate that villagers learned to interpret subtle cues, the direction of wind, the type of tracks, or even changes in the frost's texture. Curiously, some hunters carried small bundles of herbs or scent markers to mask their presence, a primitive yet effective form of camouflage. Researchers have examined how these techniques reflect both practical knowledge and early experimentation with environmental adaptation. Returning to the village, you see neighbours sharing the results of their foraging and hunting. Records reveal that collaboration and information sharing was central to survival. Small tips, such as the location of a rabbit burrow or a suitable patch of berries, could benefit multiple households. Interestingly, some families would preserve small portions of their catch specifically to provide for others, reinforcing social cohesion and mutual reliance. Experts remain uncertain about whether such practices were formally organised or emerged organically. But the effect on community resilience is clear. Back inside your hut, you prepare the catch for storage or cooking. Archaeological evidence suggests that smoking, salting, or drying were common methods for extending the shelf life of meat and fish during winter months. Oddly enough, some households would hang small portions near the hearth for quick access, while preserving the bulk in insulated pits or cellars. Scholars have explored the efficiency of these methods, noting how practical experimentation shaped survival strategies across generations. The children watch closely, learning not only techniques but also the subtleties of patience, observation, and timing. Contemporary accounts indicate that this informal apprenticeship was essential understanding animal behavior, judging the weather, and selecting appropriate hunting tools were life skills honed gradually. Curiously, some households taught children to read snow patterns or subtle tracks, skills that could indicate the presence of prey or hazards. This combination of education and labour ensured continuity of knowledge and preparedness for future winters. Outside, the wind carries the faint scent of animals and forest, mixing with the icy crispness of snow. Researchers have examined how environmental awareness guided both hunting and foraging, emphasizing observation, pattern recognition, and adaptive strategies. Some unusual methods involved using leftover food scraps to lure birds or small animals closer, reflecting a blend of creativity, necessity, and experiential learning. You feel how every movement, every observation, and every subtle adjustment is part of a complex web of survival knowledge. Evening approaches, and you return to the warmth of the hearth, the day's effort secured. Contemporary accounts indicate that meals prepared from hunted or foraged items offered not only nutrition, but a sense of accomplishment and continuity. Interestingly, the very act of participating in these routines, observing patterns, and learning through action instilled a quiet confidence in both children and adults. Experts remain divided on how standardized these practices were across Europe, but the underlying principles of observation, creativity, and careful planning are universal. Settling near the fire, you feel the combined effect of warmth, nourishment, and accomplishment. Archaeological evidence suggests that survival in winter was less about a single dramatic intervention and more about a continuous series of attentive, informed actions. Curiously, even small tasks stacking wood, checking traps, rotating preserved food form part of a carefully orchestrated rhythm, a network of strategies that ensures both people and animals endure the long, frozen months. You breathe in the heat, the aroma of cooking, and the subtle sense of continuity, appreciating how deeply observation and adaptation permeate every aspect of life during winter. You kneel beside the storage pit, brushing away the frost that has settled over the top layers of vegetables. Preserving the summer bounty is a delicate, ongoing task, and contemporary accounts indicate that proper layering and insulation were essential to prevent spoilage. You rotate root vegetables, feeling the subtle firmness of turnips and carrots, and rearrange cabbages to ensure air circulates while maintaining warmth. Interestingly, some villagers place small straw dividers between different types of vegetables to protect against moisture transfer, a clever adaptation that balances simplicity with effectiveness. You pause to examine jars of pickled cabbage and other fermented foods. Records reveal that these methods provided not only sustenance but essential nutrients, particularly vitamin C, which could help prevent winter scurvy. Some unusual practices involve storing pickled vegetables near the hearth temporarily before returning them to the pit, slightly warming the contents to slow condensation and prevent spoilage. Researchers have explored how different regions adapted fermentation and storage practices based on local climate, soil, and available materials. Next, you check the salted and smoked meats, ensuring they remain dry and safe for consumption. Archaeological evidence suggests that smokehouses and storage pits were carefully ventilated to maintain preservation without freezing or overheating. Oddly enough, some households would occasionally rotate smaller pieces closer to the surface for daily use, while leaving larger cuts insulated beneath straw and earth. Scholars continue to debate whether these rotations followed formalized schedules or were guided purely by instinct and experience. But the principle of staggered access is clear. Water management remains critical. Even for stored vegetables, melted snow or thawed ice is used sparingly to clean surfaces or prepare food. And contemporary accounts indicate that careful monitoring of moisture helped prevent rot. Interestingly, some villagers place small bundles of dried herbs atop vegetables, not only for flavor, but to absorb excess humidity and deter pests. Researchers have examined these subtle interventions, noting how seemingly small adaptations had cumulative effects on food longevity. Children observe and assist, learning the intricate steps required to maintain winter provisions. Records show that this hands-on education was crucial, passing down techniques that had been refined over generations. Curiously, some households taught children to identify early signs of spoilage, such as discoloration or unusual texture, turning everyday chores into lessons in observation and foresight. This integration of labour and learning ensured that practical knowledge remained alive through the long winters. Outside, the wind rattles thin branches, reminding you that even the most careful storage is only part of the survival equation. Scholars have examined how microclimates, pit orientation, and snow cover influence preservation success. Oddly enough, some families would use small snow mounds as natural insulation for partially exposed root caches, demonstrating the creative use of environmental conditions to enhance storage. you realize that survival often relied as much on understanding and manipulating the environment as it did on domestic effort. Back in the hut, you stir a thick stew incorporating root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats. Contemporary accounts indicate that combining ingredients in this way not only conserves fuel, but balances flavor and nutrition. Interestingly, some peasants would add small aromatic herbs, enhancing palatability and providing a sense of comfort in otherwise monotonous winter meals. Researchers have explored whether these minor touches contributed significantly to morale and endurance, highlighting the subtle interplay between practicality and psychological resilience. You take a moment to listen to the village settling into evening, the hush of snow-covered streets punctuated by faint animal sounds or distant footsteps. Records suggest that such quiet periods were used to perform final checks on stored food, redistribute portions, and plan for the next day's work. Some unusual practices included leaving small tokens near storage areas to indicate completed inspections or to signal particular precautions, an informal system that reinforced both accountability and communication within households. By nightfall, the storage pit, hearth, and pantry are secure, and provisions are carefully organized for continued winter sustenance. Archaeological evidence shows that these seemingly simple routines, rotation, layering, monitoring moisture, form the backbone of survival. Interestingly, even the smallest actions, like adjusting straw layers or rotating jars, create a cumulative effect that extends the life of food and reduces risk. You settle near the hearth, absorbing warmth, scents, and the quiet assurance that these carefully maintained strategies allow both people and animals to endure yet another long, frozen season. You step into the multi-family hut, feeling the warmth radiate from the central hearth as the wind rattles the outside walls. Documentation reveals that many peasants shared indoor space with extended family or neighbors during winter, pooling warmth and conserving fuel. You notice how straw mats are layered strategically to maximize insulation and create separate sleeping areas while maintaining collective heat. Curiously, some families even built low partitions from spare timber or bundled reeds, subtly dividing space while still allowing warmth to circulate freely. The practice of communal sleeping is surprisingly effective. Archaeological evidence shows that tightly arranged bedding reduces heat loss and allows weaker individuals to benefit from body warmth. Interestingly, small animals such as cats or dogs were often included in these shared spaces, adding extra layers of comfort and companionship. Experts remain divided on how common multi-family arrangements were, but the principle of shared warmth appears in multiple records across regions. You notice children tucked close to adults, wrapped in layers of blankets and fur. Documentation indicates that early exposure to communal sleeping helped teach vigilance and social cooperation. Some villagers occasionally use small clay pots of hot embers placed beneath straw to maintain floor warmth, a practical measure that also demonstrates inventive thinking within limited resources. Historical interpretations differ concerning the prevalence of this method, but its effectiveness in generating residual heat is clear. Movement within the hut is slow and deliberate. Documentation reveals that careful coordination prevented accidents and minimized heat loss. Interestingly, families would schedule tasks such as tending fires, feeding animals, or checking stored food to coincide with natural light or brief periods of warmth, creating a rhythm that conserved energy while meeting essential needs. Researchers have explored how these routines formed organically from observation and trial, highlighting adaptive strategies that persisted through generations. You glance at the walls, noticing small gaps and cracks. It remains uncertain whether additional coverings, such as tapestries, hides, or straw, were widespread. But in some homes, these measures added layers of insulation and muffled the cold wind. Some villagers occasionally placed bundles of straw along the lower walls, creating a simple barrier that both preserved warmth and cushioned movement. The combination of structural adaptation and household ingenuity illustrates the seamless integration of environment and survival. Children move carefully, stepping around adults, learning the layout and subtleties of the shared space. Contemporary accounts indicate that these early lessons were crucial understanding airflow, managing fire proximity, and maintaining personal and communal warmth were life skills instilled naturally. Interestingly, the routine also taught patience and timing, as each person adjusted to the collective needs of the household. The hearth itself is the focal point of daily life. Archaeological evidence shows that the hearth's placement and consistent use regulated temperature, light, and cooking efficiency. Some households occasionally use small, movable screens of clay or metal to direct heat towards sleeping areas or work surfaces, demonstrating a nuanced understanding of thermal management. Experts are divided on how common such techniques were, but they reveal inventive solutions within the limitations of simple construction. You settle near the fire, feeling the warmth seeping through layers of clothing and blankets. Documentation indicates that these shared spaces fostered both survival and social cohesion. Curiously, some families would incorporate small daily rituals, stirring a pot, rotating bedding, or checking stored provisions to reinforce both comfort and security. Scholars continue to debate whether these practices were instinctual, learned, or culturally codified, yet their presence across multiple accounts suggests enduring value. Evening descends, and the quiet of the winter hut becomes almost meditative. The combined heat of bodies, fire, and animals creates a cocoon-like atmosphere, buffering against the relentless cold outside. Researchers have explored how these microclimates within huts contributed to survival rates, particularly for children and the elderly. Interestingly, the subtle layering of effort, observation, and adaptation forms a rhythm that is both practical and emotionally stabilizing, turning the challenges of winter into a manageable, almost comforting routine. By nightfall, everyone is settled into the warmth, the straw beneath them insulating, the fire glowing steadily, and the collective quiet punctuated only by gentle breathing and the occasional rustle of clothing or bedding. Documentation reveals that this integration of shared space, observation, and small inventive measures allowed peasants to endure months of harsh weather with resilience. You lean back near the hearth, appreciating the interplay of warmth, community, and thoughtful adaptation, sensing the invisible structures that make survival possible even in the coldest, darkest nights. You step outside as the first hints of snowfall drift from the grey sky, coating the landscape in quiet white. Travel is treacherous, and contemporary accounts indicate that villagers carefully planned every excursion, considering both distance and exposure to wind and cold. You follow a path beaten down by repeated footfalls, noticing how subtle markers, broken twigs, bundled straw, or even displaced stones guide safe passage. Curiously, some families would leave small supplies along frequently used routes, ensuring that anyone caught in unexpected weather could find nourishment or tools. The snow muffles sound, and you feel the isolation that winter imposes. Evidence shows that communication between households relied on observation and subtle signals, from smoke rising predictably from chimneys to lanterns placed at thresholds. Interestingly, these signals were often coordinated informally, a mix of social awareness and practical necessity, allowing villagers to remain connected even in cold, dark conditions. Experts remain divided on how widespread these signalling practices were, but their effectiveness in mitigating risk is clear. You reach a nearby field where small game might be foraged, stepping lightly to avoid alerting wildlife. Archaeological evidence suggests that hunting and foraging in winter required intimate knowledge of terrain, animal behaviour, and seasonal patterns. Some unusual methods involved scattering small bits of food to lure birds closer, or setting rudimentary snares along known animal tracks. Scholars continue to debate how widespread and standardised these practices were, but they demonstrate an ongoing reliance on observation and creative adaptation to sustain households. Turning toward the village, you observe neighbours performing essential winter chores, hauling firewood, clearing snow from paths, and checking on livestock. Documentation reveals that communal awareness of activity and timing enhanced efficiency and reduced risk. Curiously, some households left small markers on fences or doorways to signal tasks completed or areas requiring attention, a subtle system of coordination built on experience and observation. Researchers have explored the ways in which informal communication networks contributed to resilience in harsh climates. Inside the hut, you check on stored root vegetables and grains, ensuring that moisture and cold have not compromised the food. Records indicate that rotating food stores, adjusting straw layers, and monitoring containers were critical for long-term preservation. Interestingly, some families kept small vials of herbs tucked within jars, both for flavour and to discourage pests, combining practicality with resourcefulness. Experts are divided on how common this practice was, but it illustrates a broader culture of attentive care and innovation within the household. You pause near the hearth, feeling warmth seep into your gloves and clothing. Contemporary accounts indicate that maintaining a stable interior environment was essential, balancing heat from the fire with ventilation to prevent smoke buildup or mold growth. Some unusual adaptations included small clay or metal screens that directed heat towards sleeping areas or cooking surfaces, subtly enhancing comfort and efficiency. Scholars continue to explore regional variations of these strategies, showing that inventive solutions were shaped by both environment and available materials. Children move quietly through the hut, participating in minor tasks while observing adults. Documentation reveals that hands-on learning was crucial for imparting survival skills carrying water, stacking wood, checking ice, and tending animals all became lessons in observation, patience, and resource management. Curiously, some households taught children to read environmental cues, like frost thickness or animal movement patterns, enhancing situational awareness even at a young age. The sun dips low, and long shadows stretch across frozen fields and village streets. Evidence shows that the timing of chores, food preparation, and movement outside was closely aligned with natural light, maximizing safety and efficiency. Interestingly, some families synchronized certain activities with neighboring households, facilitating shared labor and reinforcing social bonds. Researchers have explored these informal cooperative networks, emphasizing their role in winter survival and resource management. Returning to the warmth of the hut, you stir a pot of thick stew, the aroma enveloping the space and drawing the family closer. Contemporary accounts indicate that these communal meals were not just sustenance, but a way to reinforce social cohesion and collective resilience. Some unusual practices involved adding small preserved fruits or herbs to the pot, enhancing flavour and variety during months when fresh food was scarce. Scholars continue to debate the extent of these culinary adaptations, yet they clearly reflect creativity and attentiveness within constrained circumstances. As night settles fully over the village, the hushed snow, glowing hearth, and muted activity create a calm rhythm. Evidence shows that this steady pattern of observation, care, and practical adaptation tending animals, rotating food, managing warmth, and maintaining communication form the backbone of survival through harsh winters. You lean back near the fire, absorbing warmth, scent, and sound, appreciating how the deliberate blending of preparation, observation, and subtle innovation allows life to continue even in the coldest and most challenging months. You rise before dawn, the world outside cloaked in pale blue twilight and crisp frost. Contemporary accounts indicate that early mornings were essential for checking animals, ensuring the fire burned steadily, and assessing stored provisions. You trudge through the snow toward the barn, feeling each step sink slightly into powdery drifts. Interestingly, some villagers would mark familiar routes with small stones or bundled reeds, creating a subtle navigation system that allowed safer movement before the sun fully rose. These small interventions reveal a blend of observation and ingenuity designed to manage daily risks. Inside the barn, animals stir, their breath forming delicate clouds in the cold air. Documentation shows that monitoring livestock in winter was continuous, particularly to prevent frostbite and illness. Some unusual practices involved layering straw over weaker animals or positioning them near walls shielded from prevailing winds, measures that required both experience and attention. Experts remain divided on how widespread these protective arrangements were, but they highlight the careful planning that structured daily life. You carry water from a partially thawed container, feeling the chill seep through your gloves. Records reveal that water management was as critical as feeding livestock, with frozen sources requiring constant monitoring and inventive solutions. Interestingly, some households would place small straw-wrapped containers near the hearth to thaw gradually, balancing accessibility with conservation of heat. Scholars have explored regional differences in these methods, showing how geography and climate influenced household strategies. Turning toward the storage pit, you inspect root vegetables and preserved foods. Contemporary accounts indicate that rotation, layering, and careful monitoring were key to sustaining households for months without fresh produce. Some villagers occasionally buried extra portions under layers of straw or sand as a backup supply, a simple yet effective method to protect against spoilage or sudden scarcity. Researchers have examined how these micro-strategies were transmitted through families and across generations, highlighting a culture of observation and innovation. The children move quietly, learning by observing adult routines. Documentation suggests that participation in chores was integral to education, teaching not only practical skills but also attentiveness and patience. Curiously, some families instructed children to recognize subtle environmental cues, such as frost patterns or shifting animal tracks, reinforcing early survival instincts and situational awareness. This informal apprenticeship ensured that knowledge persisted across generations, even during harsh conditions. Back inside the hut, the hearth glows steadily, radiating warmth and light. Records indicate that cooking and heating were coordinated to maximize efficiency, with meals often prepared while tending fires and monitoring stored foods. Some unusual practices involved using residual heat from simmering pots to warm bedding or small areas of the floor, a subtle adaptation demonstrating ingenuity within the limitations of domestic space. Scholars continue to discuss the prevalence of such techniques, but the logic behind them is clear. You carry chopped firewood to the hearth, observing the rhythm of family labour. Documentation shows that careful organisation of resources, wood, water, food was essential to maintain energy and ensure safety during long, cold days. Interestingly, some households kept small caches of dry fuel near key points, allowing quick access for sudden needs without disrupting warmth in the main living area. Researchers have explored how these strategies reinforced household resilience and reduced exposure to harsh outdoor conditions. Outside, the wind ruffles the snow, carrying faint sounds of distant movement. Contemporary accounts suggest that observation of the environment, from wind direction to snow density, informed decisions about travel, chores, and resource allocation. Curiously, some villagers would make small markers or adjust snow piles to indicate safe paths for neighbours or family members returning from fields or woods. These subtle signals highlight an embedded knowledge of environment and community coordination. As the sun rises, light glints off frost-covered roofs and fields. Documentation reveals that morning routines were synchronized with natural cues, balancing efficiency, safety, and labor. Some unusual practices involved warming water and supplies near the hearth, before distribution to animals or cooking areas. A small but effective adaptation that conserved energy and time. Scholars have explored how these minor adjustments accumulated into broader patterns of winter survival. By mid-morning, the hut and barn are functioning as a coordinated system: fire maintained, food monitored, animals fed, and water available. Contemporary accounts indicate that this continuous attention to detail combined with observation, improvisation, and careful planning allowed peasant households to endure months of extreme cold. You pause near the hearth, feeling warmth seep through your clothing, noticing the quiet rhythm of survival, and appreciating how every action, no matter how small, contributes to life's continuity during the harshest season. You step out into the quiet village morning, the snow muffling footsteps and softening every sound. Records indicate that early risers were often responsible for ensuring that fires remained burning, animals were fed, and water sources were checked before the day grew colder. You trudge carefully across the icy yard, each step deliberate, feeling the cold bite through layers of wool and leather. Interestingly, some villagers would tie small bundles of straw to guide paths or mark safe walking routes, a simple but effective method to navigate in fresh snow or low visibility. You approach the root cellars, their entrances partially covered with frost and straw. Contemporary observations show that these cellars maintained a remarkably stable temperature, preserving vegetables and grains for months at a time. An unexpected approach involved adding layers of dry leaves or sawdust between layers of food, insulating produce while preventing direct contact with damp soil. Scholars have explored how widespread these insulation methods were, but the practice highlights practical ingenuity and close attention to the environment. Carrying water to the barn, you notice how livestock huddle together, generating heat that radiates through the structure. Evidence confirms that proximity of animals to one another, and sometimes to human dwellings, was a deliberate strategy to conserve warmth. Some villagers occasionally added extra straw or even small wooden partitions to create microclimates within stalls, especially for weaker or sick animals. Experts have not reached a consensus on how common these microclimate adjustments were, but their effectiveness is evident. Back in the hut, you tend to cooking tasks. Records indicate that slow-cooked stews and porridges were a staple, providing both calories and warmth. Curiously, some households would sprinkle a small amount of ash into bread dough or porridge, believing it improved texture or flavour. Researchers have noted that these minor additions reflect experimentation and adaptation to limited resources, turning ordinary meals into functional sustenance strategies. The children move carefully around the hut, learning by watching adults rotate food, monitor animals, and tend fires. Evidence confirms that hands-on observation was critical for passing down survival skills, from recognizing ice thickness in water containers to judging when firewood needed replenishing. Interestingly, in some villages, children were taught to mark subtle environmental signs, like tracks in the snow or changes in wind patterns, helping them anticipate hazards or locate resources independently. You step outside briefly to inspect firewood caches. Contemporary observations show that stacking wood in specific arrangements and shielding it with straw or cloth prevented moisture accumulation and ensured ready access during storms. An unexpected approach involved placing smaller bundles near entrances for quick use, while keeping larger stacks insulated for long-term needs. Scholars have explored regional variations, noting that environmental conditions dictated the most effective storage strategies. Returning to the barn, you distribute water and check feed, noting subtle changes in animal behavior. Records indicate that attentive observation helped prevent frostbite, starvation, or illness among livestock, ensuring a reliable source of milk, meat, and labor throughout winter. Curiously, some families would occasionally place hay or straw near doorways to prevent animals from lingering in cold drafts. A small but meaningful adaptation. Researchers have noted that such adjustments often arose from careful trial and error rather than formal instruction. By mid-morning, the village settles into a rhythm, fires tend themselves, animals are nourished, and provisions are monitored. Evidence confirms that consistent repetition of these tasks created a system of survival where small, deliberate actions compounded into long-term resilience. Interestingly, some households coordinated tasks with neighbours, synchronizing labour to conserve energy and maintain social bonds. Experts remain divided on how formal these cooperative strategies were, yet their effectiveness in sustaining community life is clear. You pause near the hearth, inhaling the mixed scents of firewood, simmering food, and straw. Records indicate that domestic spaces were organised to maximise warmth and efficiency, with cooking, storage, and sleeping areas carefully positioned. An unexpected approach involved using residual heat from simmering food to slightly warm nearby sleeping areas or drying clothing. Scholars have explored these practices, noting that such small interventions reflect an intimate understanding of energy management and household needs. As evening approaches, the village softens into quiet anticipation. Evidence confirms that the cumulative effect of these careful routines feeding animals, monitoring water, rotating food, and managing firewood ensured that households could endure extended periods of extreme cold. Curiously, the subtle choreography of movement, observation, and small inventive solutions transforms winter from relentless struggle into a coordinated, enduring rhythm. You sit near the hearth, feeling warmth seep through your layers, appreciating the quiet intelligence embedded in every action that sustains life through the season. You step into the garden, now buried under a thick layer of snow, feeling the chill bite at your cheeks and hands. Contemporary accounts indicate that even in deep winter, peasants occasionally checked their outdoor spaces for stored food, herbs, or materials that might have shifted or been damaged by frost. Interestingly, some villagers would leave small caches of dried herbs or preserved roots partially exposed to the snow, allowing quick access without disturbing the main storage areas. This simple yet effective system shows an intimate understanding of balance between preservation and convenience. You kneel to inspect a patch of snow-covered soil, brushing lightly to reveal a few hardy winter herbs still tucked beneath. Evidence confirms that certain plants, like parsley or sage, could survive the cold and provide flavour, medicinal benefits, or both. Curiously, some households use these herbs not only for food but as natural air purifiers, hanging small bundles near the hearth to improve air quality and subtly influence the indoor environment. Researchers have noted these multi-purpose strategies as examples of practical adaptation in everyday life. Turning toward the barn, you check on the livestock again. Records show that huddled animals created pockets of warmth that were critical for survival, especially when temperatures plummeted overnight. Some villagers occasionally added extra straw or constructed small windbreaks within pens to protect weaker or older animals, a practice that illustrates careful observation and creativity. Experts remain divided on how widespread such microclimate adaptations were, but the principles of protection and efficiency are clear. Inside the hut, you notice how the layering of blankets, fur, and straw creates a small, stable environment. Contemporary accounts indicate that bedding and sleeping arrangements were carefully managed to preserve warmth. with communal sleeping being particularly effective. An unexpected approach involved placing small clay pots of hot embers under mats or near feet to provide residual heat, demonstrating innovative ways to maximize comfort and safety. Scholars continue to explore regional differences in such techniques, revealing the interplay of culture, environment, and necessity. You pause at the hearth, watching the fire flicker and warm the room. Evidence shows that tending the fire was a continuous task, not only for cooking, but also to maintain temperature stability for both humans and stored food. Interestingly, some households arrange firewood strategically to create zones of warmth, ensuring that sleeping areas and workspaces were comfortable while conserving fuel. Researchers have noted that these small intentional adjustments contributed significantly to household resilience during prolonged cold spells. Children move quietly, participating in minor chores while observing adult routines. Records indicate that practical learning began at an early age, teaching them to monitor animal behavior, check water supplies, rotate food, and adjust bedding or clothing for warmth. Curiously, some families would engage children in games that simultaneously built skill and awareness, such as balancing small loads of wood or tracing animal tracks in snow, blending education and labour seamlessly. You step outside briefly to check firewood caches. Contemporary accounts show that exposure to snow and wind could compromise fuel quality, so careful stacking, covering, and insulation were essential. Some villagers occasionally place smaller bundles closer to the hut for quick access, while keeping the main supply sheltered and dry. Scholars have explored how such resource management varied by region, demonstrating how environmental conditions shaped household practices. Returning to the warmth of the hut, you stir a hearty stew that combines root vegetables, grains, and small portions of preserved meat. Evidence confirms that combining food sources provided both nutrition and energy for labour-intensive days. Interestingly, households often experimented with herbs or other flavourings to improve palatability, turning necessity into subtle comfort. Researchers have examined these small culinary innovations as indicators of resourcefulness and adaptation within limited means. Outside, the wind rattles branches and stirs snow across fields. Records indicate that environmental observation was constant, guiding decisions about when to travel, how to manage animals, and how to adjust clothing and bedding. Curiously, some villagers use small markers or simple signals to communicate status or safety along common paths, a practice blending practicality with social awareness. Scholars continue to explore how these informal systems reinforce community resilience in winter. As night falls, the village becomes quiet, the snow muffling distant sounds. Evidence shows that the cumulative effect of careful monitoring, labour, and observation tending animals, maintaining food, adjusting bedding, and preserving firewood sustained households throughout the coldest months. Interestingly, even seemingly minor actions, repeated and refined, created a reliable rhythm that transformed hardship into structured survival. You sit near the hearth, breathing in warmth and the aroma of food, appreciating the subtle intelligence woven into everyday routines that ensures life continues through winter's challenges. You trudge along a snow-laden path toward the frozen river, feeling the cold air bite through layers of wool and leather. Records indicate that rivers were not only vital for water, but also for ice harvesting, which extended the preservation of food and drink. You notice the careful method villagers used to break and transport ice, each movement deliberate to avoid injury and waste. Curiously, some households would store ice in straw-lined pits or clay-lined cellars, a practical solution that leveraged insulation to maintain supplies through months of freezing temperatures. The riverbank is slippery, and you step cautiously, noting tracks of animals and other villagers. Contemporary observations show that reading tracks was essential for both hunting and navigation. allowing people to anticipate wildlife behavior or identify safe routes. Interestingly, some villages created simple markers along paths, like stacked stones or tied reeds, guiding family members safely through drifts or thin ice patches. Scholars continue to debate the prevalence of such practices, yet their ingenuity and practicality are evident in multiple accounts. You split a thick slab of ice with a small saw, careful to manage your energy and minimize exposure. Documentation reveals that ice harvesting was often coordinated among households, maximizing efficiency and safety. Some unusual practices involved floating ice in water channels to prevent it from freezing to surfaces, demonstrating subtle understanding of thermal dynamics. Researchers have explored these methods, noting how environmental observation, trial, and shared knowledge combine to create sustainable survival strategies. Carrying a block of ice toward the village, you feel the weight pressing against your arms and shoulders. Evidence confirms that storage and careful handling were as crucial as harvesting itself, ensuring ice remained usable for food preservation and household needs. Interestingly, some families kept small caches near entrances for immediate use, while insulating larger blocks in cellars or pits, balancing convenience with long-term preservation. Scholarly perspectives vary regarding regional practices, but the principle of layered utility is clear. You pause to watch villagers tending to livestock in the snow. Contemporary accounts indicate that proximity to insulated barns and careful feeding routines helped animals maintain body heat, which in turn contributed warmth to nearby structures. Curiously, some households would adjust straw bedding daily, rotating layers or adding fresh material to optimize insulation. Experts have not reached a consensus on the prevalence of these small adjustments, but their effectiveness is unmistakable in sustaining animal health. Returning to the hut, you observe the layered organization of food stores. Documentation reveals that root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats were arranged to maximize accessibility and minimize spoilage. Some unusual practices involved using straw or sand as separators, insulating items while also preventing contact with moisture. Researchers have noted that these subtle methods reflected both experience and careful observation of environmental conditions. The children help quietly, move in small bundles of firewood or fetching water, learning through participation. Contemporary observations show that this hands-on training instilled essential survival skills, reading weather patterns, judging ice thickness, and managing domestic resources. Interestingly, some households taught children to anticipate changes in snow or frost, developing observational skills that allowed them to adapt quickly to shifting conditions. Inside, you tend the fire, adding small logs to maintain a steady heat. Evidence confirms that careful fire management reduced fuel consumption while preserving warmth throughout the household. Some villages occasionally used reflective surfaces or strategic placement of logs to maximize heat distribution, a subtle yet effective adaptation. Scholarly interpretations differ regarding how widely these techniques were applied, but their ingenuity is apparent. Outside, the wind rattles branches and stirs snow across fields and streets. Contemporary accounts indicate that environmental awareness guided decisions about movement, chores, and resource allocation. Curiously, some villages use small markers or symbolic objects to indicate hazards or safe routes, a practical system blending observation with social communication. Researchers have examined these informal networks, highlighting their role in coordinating household and community survival. By nightfall, the hut and village settle into a quiet rhythm. Evidence shows that repeated, attentive routines harvesting ice, rotating food, tending animals, and managing firewood form the backbone of winter endurance. Interestingly, the integration of observation, preparation, and small creative adjustments creates a stable system, allowing life to persist through the harshest months. You sit near the hearth, warmth seeping through layers of clothing, appreciating the quiet, methodical orchestration that sustains human and animal life alike. You walk carefully along the frost-covered village paths, the early light reflecting softly on the snow. Records indicate that movement in winter was planned deliberately, with villagers timing chores and travel to coincide with daylight and safer conditions. You notice how each footprint is crisp and well-defined, guiding others along the same routes. Curiously, some households would place small bundles of straw or twigs to mark safe areas or hidden hazards, creating an informal yet effective navigation system that relied on observation and experience. You approach the communal well, its surface partially frozen, and prepare to break away ice for drinking water. Contemporary evidence suggests that access to water required constant attention and creative solutions, from melting snow to insulating containers with straw. Interestingly, some villagers would preheat small amounts of water near the hearth before distributing it, preventing sudden exposure to freezing temperatures. Scholars are divided on how standardized these techniques were, but the effectiveness of these methods is clear. Carrying water back toward the huts, you pass neighbours checking on livestock in the snow. Accounts from the period reveal that careful monitoring of animals was essential for both survival and resource management. Some households occasionally reinforced pens with extra straw or erected makeshift windbreaks to protect weaker animals from harsh drafts. Researchers have noted that these adjustments required both attentiveness and experience, combining observation with ingenuity. Inside your hut, you rotate stored vegetables and grains, ensuring that nothing is in contact with moisture and that airflow prevents early spoilage. It is documented that regular inspection of preserved foods was essential to sustaining the household through long winters. Interestingly, some families would add small layers of dried leaves or straw to separate items, preventing condensation and preserving freshness longer. Scholars have examined these methods as examples of micro-adaptations to environmental conditions. The children help quietly, fetching small bundles of wood and assisting with water. Contemporary evidence suggests that such participation was a crucial part of informal education, teaching responsibility, timing, and observational skills. Curiously, in some households, children were instructed to note subtle environmental cues, like frost patterns or animal behavior, which helped predict weather changes or resource needs. This hands-on learning ensured that survival knowledge was passed efficiently across generations. You tend the fire, adding carefully measured logs to maintain warmth without exhausting resources. Accounts from the period indicate that fire management was continuous, balancing energy needs with fuel conservation. Interestingly, some households use small metal or clay screens to direct heat toward work or sleeping areas, demonstrating subtle innovations designed to maximize comfort. Experts are divided on how common these adaptations were, but their practical effect is undeniable. Outside, the wind stirs snow across frozen fields. Contemporary evidence suggests that environmental awareness was critical for decision-making, influencing when to venture outside, how to manage animals, and how to access stored supplies. Some villagers occasionally left small indicators, such as stones or sticks, marking safe routes for others in the community. Researchers have noted that these informal systems strengthened both safety and social cohesion during harsh winter months. You return to the hut, checking on small pots of simmering food. It is documented that slow-cooked meals conserved fuel and provided warmth, calories, and a comforting routine. Interestingly, families sometimes added preserved herbs or fruits to enhance flavor or nutrition, a small act that made repetitive winter meals more palatable and psychologically reassuring. Scholars have explored these culinary adaptations as evidence of thoughtful problem-solving within constrained resources. As evening falls, You observe the quiet rhythm of the village smoke rising from chimneys, animals settled in pens, and hushed footsteps crossing packed snow. Accounts from the period reveal that cumulative, attentive routines feeding animals, managing firewood, rotating provisions, and monitoring water formed a reliable system that allowed households to endure prolonged cold. Curiously, the subtle interplay of observation, labour, and small inventive strategies creates a rhythm that is both practical and calming, transforming hardship into manageable daily structure. Settling near the hearth, warmth radiating through layers of clothing, you reflect on the integration of preparation, observation, and creativity in everyday survival. Contemporary evidence shows that these layered strategies, when repeated, observed, and refined, ensured that both people and animals endured the harshest months. You inhale the mixed aromas of firewood, cooked vegetables, and preserved herbs, feeling the quiet satisfaction of routines honed over generations. A testament to human adaptability in the long, frozen winter, you step out into the crisp morning air, the frost sparkling on rooftops and fences, and feel the sharp bite of winter across your cheeks. Records indicate that mornings were often the busiest part of the day, devoted to feeding animals, checking ice or water supplies, and tending firewood before the temperature dropped further. Interestingly, some villagers would leave small indicators of completed tasks, such as stacked firewood or marked paths, allowing other household members to coordinate without speaking. These subtle systems of communication illustrate both practical foresight and communal awareness. You approach the barn, noting how the animals huddle together for warmth. Contemporary evidence suggests that the arrangement of stalls, layering of straw, and strategic positioning of weaker animals were all critical to survival. Some unusual methods involved placing small partitions or extra straw to create microclimates, especially for sick or elderly animals. Scholars remain uncertain about how widespread these techniques were, but their use highlights careful observation and adaptive ingenuity, carrying water back from a partially thawed source. You notice the subtle changes in the environment: shifting wind, fresh snow drifts, and ice formation. Records indicate that environmental awareness was crucial for managing outdoor labour, preventing accidents, and protecting resources. Curiously, some families would adjust snow piles or break ice on small channels in advance, preparing paths for future use. Researchers have explored these strategies as examples of anticipatory planning, reflecting a deep understanding of environmental patterns. Back inside the hut, you check stored food, rotating root vegetables and grains. Accounts from the period reveal that regular inspection prevented spoilage and maintained nutrition throughout the long winter months. Interestingly, some households layered straw or sawdust between different items to insulate them further and reduce moisture contact. Scholars have noted that these simple techniques were remarkably effective, demonstrating practical problem-solving without formal engineering or modern tools. The children assist with small chores, quietly learning by observation. Contemporary evidence suggests that this hands-on learning was essential, teaching them how to read animal behaviour, check ice thickness, and manage firewood. Curiously, some families also encourage children to note subtle cues in the snow or wind, developing skills to anticipate hazards or locate resources. These lessons combined practical labour with education, ensuring continuity of knowledge. You tend the fire, adding small logs to maintain warmth. Records indicate that careful fire management reduced fuel consumption while sustaining household comfort. Some villagers occasionally employed reflective surfaces or carefully arranged logs to direct heat towards sleeping areas or workspaces, demonstrating inventive adaptation to environmental constraints. Researchers have examined these practices, noting the combination of observation, resourcefulness, and creativity in maintaining domestic warmth. Outside, the wind whistles across fields, lifting snow and dusting the roofs of barns and huts. Contemporary evidence suggests that interpreting environmental signs was crucial for planning tasks and ensuring safety. Interestingly, some villagers would leave small markers to indicate hazards, such as thin ice or weak snow bridges, an improvised communication system enhancing household and community security. Scholars have highlighted these informal methods as examples of adaptive knowledge passed down through generations. You return to the hut, stirring a thick stew and checking on provisions. Accounts from the period show that slow-cooked meals provided both energy and warmth, serving as a central part of daily winter routines. Curiously, families sometimes added preserved herbs or fruits, enhancing nutrition and variety, making meals both practical and comforting. Experts remain divided on how widespread these culinary adaptations were, but their presence demonstrates innovation within limited resources. As evening approaches, the village enters a quiet, measured rhythm. Evidence shows that cumulative routines feeding animals, monitoring ice, rotating food, and managing firewood formed a reliable framework that ensured survival. Interestingly, even minor adjustments, like layering straw or adjusting logs, contributed significantly to household endurance. You settle near the hearth, the warmth seeping through layers of clothing, appreciating the subtle orchestration of labour, observation, and ingenuity that allows life to continue through the coldest months. You trudge along the frozen path leading to the village edge, the snow sparkling under pale light, and feel the subtle tension of cold pressing against your limbs. Records indicate that during deep winter, trips beyond the immediate household were carefully timed, with villagers planning travel around daylight, wind direction, and known safe routes. Interestingly, some households would leave small bundles of straw or twigs at key points to mark paths or signal safe passage. An informal yet effective system relying on observation and experience. Approaching the communal well, you notice thin ice forming along its edges. Contemporary evidence suggests that maintaining water supplies required constant attention, with ice removed carefully to prevent contamination or injury. Some unusual practices involved preheating small amounts of water near the hearth before transporting it outside, conserving energy and reducing exposure to the cold. Researchers have noted these subtle techniques as examples of adaptive problem-solving developed through repeated experience. Carrying water back toward the barn, you observe livestock nestled in straw, their breaths forming delicate clouds in the chilly air. Accounts from the period reveal that positioning animals in specific areas within barns, combined with strategic layering of bedding, was critical to maintaining their health. Curiously, some families occasionally added partitions or extra straw to create microclimates for weaker or older animals, demonstrating attention to both behaviour and environmental conditions. Scholars continue to debate how widespread these practices were, but their effectiveness is clear. Back in the hut, you inspect preserved vegetables and grains. Documentation shows that regular rotation and layering of stored foods was vital to prevent spoilage during extended winter months. Interestingly, some households would add small layers of dry leaves or straw between items to enhance insulation and minimize moisture contact. Experts remain divided on whether these techniques were common across all regions. Yet the principle of careful observation and adaptation is evident in multiple accounts. Children move quietly, participating in chores while observing adult routines. Contemporary evidence suggests that this hands-on learning was essential for teaching skills such as monitoring ice, tending animals, and managing food stores. Some villages occasionally used games to engage children in tasks, turning labour into practice while reinforcing environmental awareness. Researchers have explored these educational methods, noting their role in transmitting survival knowledge across generations. You tend the fire, adding logs carefully to maintain a consistent temperature. Records indicate that proper fire management was central to both cooking and household warmth, with strategic placement of embers and wood enhancing efficiency. Interestingly, some families would arrange logs or small clay screens to direct heat towards sleeping areas or cooking surfaces, a subtle method of energy management. Historical interpretations vary concerning how common these techniques were, but their presence demonstrates practical ingenuity. Outside, the wind lifts snow from fields and rooftops, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. Contemporary evidence suggests that interpreting environmental signs informed decisions about travel, chores, and resource allocation. Curiously, some villagers use small markers to communicate hazards or safe routes to neighbours, blending practical safety with community awareness. Scholars have examined these informal networks as examples of locally developed systems of survival knowledge. You return to the hut, stirring a thick stew and checking firewood and water. Documentation shows that meals were prepared to maximize both nutrition and warmth, using available resources efficiently. Interestingly, adding small amounts of preserved herbs or fruits enhanced flavor and variety, a minor but psychologically significant improvement in monotonous winter routines. Experts remain divided on how standardized these culinary adaptations were, but they reflect creative problem-solving within constraints. As night falls, the village quiets, with smoke curling from chimneys and soft footsteps crossing snow-packed paths. Records indicate that the repetition of attentive routines feeding animals, rotating provisions, managing firewood, and monitoring environmental cues form the backbone of winter survival. Curiously, these small, deliberate actions combine to create a predictable rhythm, transforming hardship into a sustainable pattern. You settle near the hearth, feeling warmth, nourishment, and quiet assurance, appreciating the subtle intelligence woven into daily life that ensures continuity through the harshest months. You step outside just as the pale morning light filters through frosted trees, the snow reflecting a soft glow that blankets the village. Accounts from the period reveal that mornings were devoted to essential chores, checking animals, maintaining fires, and ensuring water and food supplies were adequate. You tread carefully, each step deliberate to conserve energy and avoid slipping on hidden ice. Curiously, some villagers occasionally left small bundles of straw or twigs along paths to mark safe routes, a simple yet clever system that guided movement through snowdrifts and low visibility. You approach the barn and notice the animals clustered together, their breath rising in faint clouds that mingle with the crisp air. Documentation confirms that huddling, combined with well-layered bedding, created microclimates that allowed weaker or older animals to survive harsh temperatures. Interestingly, some households added small partitions or extra straw around particular animals, optimizing warmth and comfort for those most vulnerable. Scholars remain uncertain about how widespread these techniques were, but their effectiveness is evident in multiple accounts. Carrying water from a partially thawed trough, you notice subtle changes in the snow and ice. Contemporary sources indicate that interpreting environmental cues, like frost thickness, wind direction, and snow drift patterns, guided safe movement and efficient labour. An inventive approach involved preemptively clearing small channels of ice near key points to ensure water access for both people and animals. Researchers have observed that such adaptations reflect intimate knowledge of the environment and careful attention to recurring patterns. Back in the hut, you check stored root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats. Documentation confirms that careful layering and regular rotation were essential to prevent spoilage over long winter months. Interestingly, some families tucked small layers of dried leaves or straw between food items to insulate them further, a simple technique that enhanced longevity without modern tools. Scholars have noted that these strategies demonstrate the subtle intelligence embedded in everyday practices. Children assist quietly, moving small bundles of firewood and observing adult routines. Contemporary sources indicate that this hands-on participation was essential for teaching survival skills. From judging ice thickness to managing food and firewood. Curiously, some households engage children in subtle observational games, such as identifying animal tracks or noting shifts in frost, blending practical education with playful learning. Researchers have explored these practices as crucial for transmitting survival knowledge across generations. You tend the hearth, adding logs with care to maintain steady warmth. Documentation confirms that strategic fire management minimized fuel consumption while maximizing comfort for both cooking and living spaces. Interestingly, some villages used clay or metal screens to direct heat towards sleeping areas or work surfaces. A simple but effective method to manage temperature. Experts remain divided on how commonly such adaptations were implemented, yet their practicality is clear. Outside, the wind stirs snow across fields and rooftops. Accounts from the period reveal that continuous attention to environmental cues influenced decisions about travel, work, and safety. Some villagers occasionally left markers or adjusted snow piles to indicate safe routes, creating a subtle communication system that reinforced community awareness. Scholars have observed that these informal networks strengthened resilience during periods of extreme cold. You return to the hut and stir a thick stew, adding preserved vegetables and herbs. Documentation indicates that such meals were essential for energy, warmth, and maintaining household morale. Curiously, some families experimented with small flavorings or additional ingredients to improve palatability, making repetitive winter meals slightly more enjoyable. Researchers have noted that these minor culinary adaptations reflect creativity within the constraints of limited resources. As night settles over the village, smoke curls from chimneys and snow muffles distant sounds. Contemporary sources indicate that the cumulative effect of attentive routines tending animals, monitoring ice and food, managing firewood created a stable framework for survival. Interestingly, the quiet repetition of these tasks formed a rhythm that transformed harsh winter months into predictable, manageable patterns. You settle near the hearth, warmth radiating through layers of clothing, and feel the subtle satisfaction of life maintained through careful observation, adaptation, and ingenuity. You step outside as the first pale light of dawn touches the snow-covered village, the cold air crisp against your cheeks. Accounts from the period reveal that early mornings were often dedicated to urgent tasks checking livestock, replenishing firewood, and monitoring water sources. You notice the deliberate rhythm of movement, each step measured to conserve warmth and avoid slipping on icy paths. Curiously, some villagers occasionally marked familiar routes with small bundles of straw or twigs, providing guidance for those navigating deep snow or low visibility. A simple yet effective survival strategy. You approach the barns, where animals huddle together in layered straw. Documentation confirms that proper bedding arrangements and grouping of animals created microclimates that allowed weaker livestock to survive harsh temperatures. Interestingly, some households added small partitions or extra straw specifically for vulnerable animals, a subtle intervention that demonstrates observation and practical problem solving. Scholars remain uncertain about how common such adjustments were, but their effectiveness is evident across multiple records. Carrying water from a partially thawed trough, you observe the ice forming along edges and the subtle shifts of snow in the wind. Contemporary sources indicate that reading environmental cues was essential for planning outdoor labour safely. An inventive approach involved pre-clearing small channels of ice near barns and water sources to facilitate access and reduce repeated exposure. Researchers have observed that such small innovations reflect a careful understanding of seasonal patterns and environmental behaviour. Back in the hut, you rotate root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats. Accounts from the period reveal that regular inspection and layering were crucial to prevent spoilage and maintain adequate food supplies for the long winter months. Interestingly, some families interleaved straw or dried leaves between items to improve insulation and prevent condensation, a minor adjustment that had significant effects on preservation. Scholars have noted that these techniques exemplify practical knowledge embedded in everyday household routines. Children move quietly, assisting with chores while observing adult routines. Contemporary sources indicate that hands-on participation was essential for learning survival skills, from monitoring ice and snow to managing food and firewood. Curiously, some families engage children in simple observational games, such as tracking animal movements or identifying subtle changes in frost, blending education with practical experience. Researchers have explored these methods as an effective means of transmitting knowledge across generations. You tend the hearth, carefully adding logs to maintain consistent warmth. Documentation shows that fire management was central to both comfort and efficient resource use, allowing cooking, heating, and domestic work to continue simultaneously. Interestingly, some households arrange logs or small screens to direct heat to sleeping areas or frequently used spaces, demonstrating subtle adaptation to environmental constraints. Experts remain divided on the prevalence of these techniques, yet the logic and effectiveness are clear. Outside, the wind stirs snow across frozen fields and rooftops. Accounts from the period indicate that observation of the environmental cues guided decisions on movement, outdoor work, and safety. Some villagers occasionally left markers to indicate hazards or safe routes. A simple communication system enhancing household and community survival. Scholars have observed that such informal signalling networks strengthened resilience in winter months. Returning to the hut, you stir a simmering stew, adding preserved vegetables and herbs. Documentation reveals that slow-cooked meals provided both nutrition and warmth, sustaining energy for ongoing labour. Curiously, households occasionally added small flavourings or preserved fruits to enhance taste and variety, turning monotonous winter meals into small comforts. Researchers have noted that these culinary innovations, while minor, contributed significantly to morale and overall endurance. As night descends, the village settles into quiet, soft rhythms. Accounts from the period reveal that repeated, attentive routines feeding animals, monitoring stored provisions, tending firewood, and observing environmental cues formed the backbone of winter survival. Interestingly, these small deliberate actions combined to create a predictable, sustaining rhythm that transformed harsh conditions into manageable daily patterns. You sit near the hearth, absorbing warmth and calm, appreciating the subtle orchestration of labour, observation, and creativity that allows life to endure through the coldest months. You step outside as the first faint glow of morning spreads across the snow-laden village. The air crisp and still. Accounts from the period reveal that final checks of livestock, firewood, and water were critical before the day's full labour began. You moved deliberately, following well-worn paths, noticing the subtle footprints and markers left by others to guide safe passage. Interestingly, some households occasionally place small bundles of straw along common routes to indicate hazards or accessible resources. A simple but effective way to navigate deep snow or icy terrain. You enter the barn, observing the animals huddled in straw. Documentation confirms that bedding arrangements and grouping were vital for survival, helping maintain body heat and prevent illness. Curiously, some families added extra partitions or layered straw to protect weaker animals, a practice that demonstrates careful observation and adaptive ingenuity. Experts are divided on how common such methods were, but their benefits are evident in multiple contemporary accounts. Carrying water from a partially thawed container, you notice the subtle changes in the ice and snow around the well. Contemporary sources indicate that these observations guided decisions about travel, labour and safety, allowing households to manage risk efficiently. An inventive approach involved pre-clearing channels of ice for future use, minimising repeated exposure to freezing conditions. Researchers have observed that such techniques reflect a sophisticated understanding of local environmental patterns. Back in the hut, you check stored root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats. Documentation reveals that regular rotation, careful layering, and insulation were essential to maintain supplies throughout the long winter months. Interestingly, some households place small layers of straw or dried leaves between items, improving preservation and reducing moisture contact. Historical interpretations vary concerning regional practices, but these methods illustrate practical knowledge refined through experience. Children assist with minor chores, observing adult routines closely. Accounts from the period show that this hands-on participation was essential for passing down skills, from managing firewood and water to interpreting environmental signs. Curiously, some families use subtle games to teach children how to monitor frost, snow drifts, and animal behavior, blending education with practical experience. Researchers have noted that these practices ensured continuity of knowledge across generations. You tend the hearth, adding logs carefully to maintain warmth. Documentation confirms that consistent fire management was critical for cooking, household warmth, and comfort. Interestingly, some households arranged logs or small screens to optimize heat distribution, ensuring that living and sleeping areas stayed warm while conserving fuel. Scholars continue to explore the prevalence of these strategies, but their effectiveness is clear. Outside, wind stirs snow across rooftops and fields, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. Accounts from the period reveal that interpreting environmental cues shape decisions about movement, chores, and resource management. Some villagers occasionally use markers to indicate hazards or safe routes for others, a practical form of communication enhancing community survival. Researchers have observed that these informal systems strengthened resilience during harsh winters. Returning to the hut, you stir a thick stew, adding preserved vegetables and small portions of herbs. Documentation shows that slow-cooked meals were central to survival, providing calories, warmth, and comfort. Curiously, households sometimes added preserved fruits or aromatic herbs to improve flavor and morale, small interventions that made winter sustenance more tolerable. Experts remain divided on how widespread such practices were, but their presence highlights the ingenuity and adaptability of everyday life. As evening falls, the village quiets, with chimneys emitting smoke and soft footsteps crossing packed snow. Records indicate that repeated, attentive routines feeding animals, rotating provisions, tending firewood, observing environmental cues formed a dependable framework for survival. Interestingly, these small deliberate actions combine to create a comforting rhythm, transforming winter from relentless hardship into a sustainable, structured pattern. You settle near the hearth, warmth seeping through layers of clothing, appreciating the careful orchestration of observation, labour, and creative adaptation that allows life to endure. The day fades gently, leaving a hush that stretches over rooftops and fields blanketed in snow. You feel the warmth of the hearth radiating into your hands and through your layers, a quiet reassurance against the cold pressing from outside. Every sound is softened, the faint rustle of straw, the gentle murmur of animals resting, the slow crackle of firewood as it releases its last warmth. Even the wind, once sharp and commanding, now drifts in muted whispers across the village, You notice how each task, each observation, and each subtle adjustment throughout the day is combined into a rhythm that sustains life, even in relentless conditions. The rotation of food, the careful tending of animals, the management of ice and water, the layering of firewood, all of it weaves a quiet, continuous network of survival. Curiously, what might appear ordinary or repetitive is, in fact, a form of resilience, practiced and refined over generations. The knowledge of how to live with winter, passed silently from adult to child, embeds itself in the very rhythm of life. Slowly, your senses relax. The aromas of cooked vegetables, herbs, and smoke mix with the subtle scent of straw and earth, grounding you in the moment. Your breath comes in calm, even rhythms, and the warmth of the room wraps around you like a protective cloak. Outside, the snow continues to fall gently, softening shapes and muting edges, creating a world that is still, quiet, and safe. Let your mind drift with this serenity. Feel the comfort of routine, the quiet ingenuity of daily life, and the enduring strength woven through careful attention and subtle creativity. Life persists through observation, care, and the steady rhythm of small deliberate actions. Allow the hush of the hearth, the soft glow of firelight, and the gentle weight of winter's quiet to lull you into rest. The village sleeps, the animals nestle, and the snow blankets every path and field, leaving you suspended in warmth, calm, and continuity. Sweet dreams,